I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Boulder Valley Board of Education for Tuesday, November 14th, 2017. Laura, could you please call the roll?
Belval. Here. Benford. Here. Fuqua.
Here.
Garcia. Here. Gephardt. Here. Marquis. Here. Myers. Here.
Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to remind everybody that the mission of the Boulder Valley School District is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children thrive and are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives. Well, good evening, everybody joining us here at the Ed Center, and those of you watching or listening at home. We're glad to have you observe and participate in our meetings if you're going to be speaking during public participation. We'll begin, as always, with the superintendent's report. Dr. Stevenson, good evening.
Good evening. You know, I have told more groups in the last couple of weeks about what an honor it is to work in Boulder Valley Schools, but I don't think I've told you all. And so I think tonight is a good time to do that. That we'll be saying goodbye to two of you. And I think all 7 of you need to hear how much it has meant to me to work in this organization. First of all, going to the schools. We have excellent schools, and it's just so fun to watch children thrive, to watch teachers caring for students, to watch principals really provide effective leadership. This community is very fortunate with the quality of its schools. Second of all, I want to talk about the people I get to work with every day. They are a remarkably committed, enthusiastic group of people who really believe in their work and believe in the schools and believe in the children. And it has just been such an honor for me to be here. And I loved my former district. I love this work. But every day, I feel very honored to come to work here in Boulder Valley. And I thought with 2 of you leaving, I just really want you to know that, how much I've enjoyed working with you. Other than that, I think that you need to know that we're beginning to work with our Teachers Association in developing our negotiations procedure. And again, it's a tribute to Boulder Valley that we work together to figure out our negotiation strategies. And I think that that says so much for how this organization works together and believes in each other. So we are beginning that planning. You'll all soon be getting some dates to hold so that we can work on that process together. But when you have shared interests and you want your kids to, be well educated, you want your teachers to be supported, and you want your employees to come to work every day and believe in this organization. And every day I see examples of how effective it is. So I just want to say thank you, and particularly with Tom and Jenny, this being your last board meeting possibly, I want you to know how much it has meant to me. And Tina, welcome back. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stevenson, and we appreciate you helping us during this transitional period very much. And thank you for your comments. Are there questions for the superintendent? All right, hearing none. Oh, Jenny?
Well, I would just like, I would just like to say that I appreciate that, Cindy, and it's been, I think, a wonderful thing to have you help us out during this transitional year.
Other comments? All right, hearing none, we'll proceed to the next item on our agenda, which is student communication. And Assistant Superintendent Mark Schaefer coming to the podium with students.
President Fuqua, members of the Board of Education, Dr. Stevenson. Among the many awesome things I get to do in my role as Assistant Superintendent is I get to work with some amazing students in a number of our leadership groups. This evening, I have brought with me 2 students from our high school student advisory committee who were selected at their respective high schools. I've had an opportunity to work with them once, and we have 4 or 5 meetings set throughout the year. So we'll have these students come to your meetings and speak to you and give you updates on some of the work we're doing. But without further ado, I'd like you to hear from our students.
Hi, my name is Grace Chow, and I go to Boulder High School. When we started the SAC just a little while ago. I was really excited to see the dedicated students that I was going to be involved with and working with. My sister was also part of the SAC when she was my age, and she's graduated now, but I'm really excited to be a part of something just like she was, to see how much she enjoyed it and was dedicated to it as well. Some of the big things, one of the first groups I was in during the first meeting, we got to talking a lot about teacher-student relationships and also advisory classes. Boulder High doesn't have any advisory classes, but from what I gathered, it's very similar to our freshman seminar classes, but for every grade. Within this, we talked about how from every school, students were eager to have better relationships with their teachers and ways that we can accomplish that. Moving into the meeting, we got to focus in on things we would be talking about more seriously in later meetings, including diversity and inclusion, and also just the classroom atmosphere, including student-student relationships and student-teacher relationships. I chose to be a part of the diversity inclusion group, and here I hope we'll get to talk about ILC and special need classrooms, and also just diversity and acceptance and bullying. Later into the meeting, one of the last things we talked about, I chose to be in a group talking about drugs and alcohol and how that was being affected and punished in our schools. Some of the three main ideas that we were able to talk about in that was having approachable administration, having relatable guest speakers, and having not the entire school punished for a small group of kids being under the influence at things like school dances. So I'm very excited to continue being a part of this, and yeah.
My name is Malik Swain. I'm a junior, and I go to Centaurus High School. My thoughts of being part of the SAC, I believe that this is a great opportunity for me to take, and I believe that I'm going to put a lot of input into this committee, as I'm involved in many numerous different activities inside of the school, and I am also part of groups of many different cultural backgrounds and people who are different around the school. And what we happen to talk about for the four main things that we're going to get more in depth about inside of the Student Advisory Committee is having cameras inside of the school, like Grace happened to say with the drugs and alcohol that is inside of our school, also the bullying and how things are going to be dealt with bullying, and finally the protests that we host at our schools, whether it be with DACA or any other issues that we believe that we need to protest about. And I happen to join the group around having cameras inside of the school, and my group happened to come down with the consensus that it is good for us to have cameras outside and near the entrance of the school, but us as students do not really enjoy having multiple cameras inside of our school. We thought that it would be a good idea to have it in the main hallways, but not having thousands of cameras in every single portion of the school, as in some ways it would be a waste of money, because it's slightly an overuse of cameras. We understand that the main hallways would be a good place to see everything, but having a camera in every single hallway would not work so much in stopping what the goals are for stopping with having those cameras. And I'm hoping that we are able to dive more into those topics and come up with more ideas on those four topics.
Thank you, Malik. Thank you, Grace. Board members, questions or comments for our student leaders? Jenny?
Well, thank you all for coming and talking to us. It sounds like you've tackled some really meaty topics that I'm really interested to hear the beginnings of discussions on. I know student cameras inside the buildings is a topic that hasn't come up in a long time, but is starting to surface. So I'm really interested to hear, how your initial conversations on that. And I just wonder how you plan to take the work you do back to your schools, or how you plan, if you've thought about how you take that back to your schools, and how you take maybe student opinion from your schools to the meetings you attend here, if you've thought about yourself as representatives in any way, I guess is my question.
In some ways, I haven't done it yet, but I believe that in the future, once we start diving more into depth around those topics, that I will actually begin to go around and asking students their opinions upon it, because I mean, as a representative, I need to represent every student as a whole. Of course, I can't go around asking every single student, but I will try to get as many as I can so I could get a general idea of what our school's feelings are about those topics.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, we were chosen as representatives. It was a big honor, and we were chosen for a reason, to represent our entire schools. And diving deeper into these topics, hopefully it will be able to get more ideas from everyone at our schools.
Thanks, Jenny. Tina?
Yeah, and thank you so much for coming. And I really look forward to hearing more about some of your comments about drugs and alcohol with dances and other events. I have heard in my community that some kids feel that it's not as inclusive because they're not using drugs, or the use of alcohol is offensive to them. So I would love to hear what you learn about that and what some of your thoughts and ideas are around the topic.
Richard?
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. Malik, you're also from Boulder High?
I'm from Centaurus.
Centaurus, good, because I didn't catch the name of the high school. Those are really, really heavy-duty topics, you know, especially the diversity, inclusiveness, and also the drug and alcohol and all that. In the city of Lafayette, there's this whole new program which is called, I think it's Communities That Care. Are you familiar with that one? Communities That Care in the city of Lafayette.
I haven't actually heard of that program.
Yeah, and they're tackling a lot of this drug and alcohol stuff too. So, just to give you a heads up on that. And I'm just wondering, after you do all of your student meetings and you get a lot of input from your students, what's the next step? I mean, because you have in the school setting, you have the school improvement, or your SACs, your school advisory committees, that also make decisions for the school. And I don't know if you have any plans of meeting with those groups so that you can tell them also some of the things that you're working on and you're finding, because from there, then it comes to DAC. And so it's just this chain of events that happen. But I'm hoping that you're considering also telling all the other decision-making groups in the school some of the things that you're finding.
Yeah, I'm most definitely hoping to tell other groups that are involved with the school and things happening around the community about what the students feel about those certain things. I feel that with taking all of that data, I need to make action with that data. So I need to communicate those ideas and those thoughts of the students to other people, so then people can better understand. Like with the drugs and alcohol, there are a bunch of students that actually do not want to do that and do not consider doing that, and just everyone needs to be included. And I think sometimes it's not everyone is included, so I'm going to in the future take action to let everyone know about that.
Yeah, and then at Boulder High School, there was, I don't know if there still is, but there used to be a Latino Parent Advisory Council at Boulder High School, and I'm not sure if it's still there or not, but it would be worth investigating if that group is still alive and if it's moving along. That would be another good group of folks that the students ought to be engaged in with. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think we have a large Latino population at Boulder High, and that's also just a big part of trying to include everyone and having everyone feel equal and comfortable with each other and teachers. I'm also a part of Unity Council at Boulder High, so this is a club where we talk about diversity and inclusion, and we just did a project with our freshman seminar where we talked about exclusion and things like that. And so hopefully, I'm hoping from the rest of these meetings I can take things back to that council and we can help diversify and help the entire school.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing in both schools.
Thanks, Richard. Kathy?
I want to join in with the rest of my board and thank you for coming. I just have a couple questions. Are you familiar with the Take Back the Night effort that's being initiated by the students at Fairview to deal with the drug and alcohol issue among the student population at Fairview? It's a initiative that was started at the student council, and it's student-led, and so I just think it might be worth looking into. What I like about it is that it is student-led, and students are signing a pledge to not come to dances and to other school events having consumed any drugs or alcohol. So it might be a good thing for you to look into because, like I said, I really, we can say all we want, that we hope that students aren't coming to school drunk or high, but if it's student initiated, I think that's really awesome. So thank you for taking on that issue. And then I just wanted to ask you, Malik, about the cameras because from the adult perspective, we have been talking a little about cameras. But I just want to assure you we're not talking about hundreds of cameras. What we're trying to figure out is what that right balance is to make sure that all of you are safe. But at the same time, we're not talking that I've heard of cameras in classrooms or in more private spaces, but more like you're suggesting in the hallways and the more common areas. Is that something that you're hearing that students are somewhat supportive of?
Yeah, I believe that, and the group that I was with believed that it is better that it's in the main areas and not specifically every area, even though that's not an idea, little radical. But with that, if it were to be a bunch of cameras or, I mean, just a certain amount that students feel comfortable with, because we also do enjoy to have a sense of security and feeling like we're not always watched, not saying that we're going to be doing the wrong things when we're not being watched, but just not that we're always watched.
No,
because with that, I understand there is a want to try to decrease the amount of bullying and maybe to see who engaged the fight or the distribution of drugs or the use of drugs. For the distribution and use of drugs part, I believe that in some ways actually more cameras would create larger amounts of ditching because kids would then want to leave the school in order to go consume or do that drug or distribute it and then come back after doing that because of the cameras.
So I think your input will be really critical in trying to figure out what that right balance is because certainly you all are living that every day, and so I really look forward to hearing your feedback on that as we try to figure out what that right balance is. So I really, like the rest of the board has said, you guys are not shying away from the hard issues, and appreciate you stepping up on those, and however we can be helpful, please let us know because we'd like to just be partners in your work. So thank you very much.
Tom?
You know, I'm glad you guys came, and I hope you'll come back. When I first got on the board, we had like monthly reports from SAC. I don't know if you guys are talking about re-engaging with that, but I have really missed the student input on the issues that we're talking about. So I value input from all community members, parents, teachers, but also students, and so we tend not to hear from students, and they're the ones that are the most important to hear from. So anything you guys can come back and do and talk with the board about, I would certainly encourage that, and thank you so much again.
Thanks, Tom. And Shelley?
Yeah, I just want to second that from Tom. Thank you for coming, and we used to get these regular reports, and I know we all looked forward to them so much, and then we started going to some of your meetings, which was also great. So it doesn't really matter how we do that, but we would love to hear more from you. So thank you.
Well, thank you for participating in the advisory committee and for being excellent representatives of your schools, and we look forward to hearing from you at future meetings. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is public hearing and public participation. The board recognizes the value of public comment on issues related to the operation of the schools. To ensure that our meeting is conducted in an orderly manner, we ask that persons who address the board confine your comments to matters that are germane to the business of the school district. Speakers on agenda items will be heard first, followed by those speaking to non-agenda items. Limit your presentation to 2 minutes. If we go over the first hour, public comment will continue at the end of the meeting. And recognize that students often attend or view our meetings. Speakers' remarks, therefore, should be suitable for an audience that includes kindergarten through 12th grade students. The board president may interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant statement that is unrelated to the business of the district or inappropriate for K-12 students. There is a lighting system on the podium. It starts at green when your 2 minutes begins, turns yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining, and turns red at the end. When the light turns red, please wrap up your comments so that the board can hear from the maximum number of speakers. We have, speaking to agenda items, we have Susan Lambert, and she has been given an additional 2 minutes from Thomas Lambert. Ms. Lambert, good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Susan Lambert, and I'm here to speak about Agenda Item 8.12, the board's requested approval of the contract for commercial real estate services for the sale of the BVSD-owned Lakeshore Estates properties. I would respectfully like to ask that this item be tabled so that the school board has a chance to review it in more detail due to its importance. I would like to point out that Lakeshore Estates subdivided properties together make up a 10-acre land dedication for that subdivision. These dedicated lands were meant to satisfy the 5% dedication requirement Boulder County imposes on all subdivision developers, and contrary to what BVSD legal counsel says, they do indeed have use restrictions. Their sole purpose is to set land aside on which to build a school or a park for the benefit of the contributing subdivision. If BVSD chooses not to build a school or park, then the dedicated land remains as green space. If the school board determines by vote that they want to sell a dedication, it is subject to a selling process which includes approval from both POSAC and the County Planning Commission. In recent years, BVSD has circumvented the land use code rules for the sale of dedicated lands, and there have been no repercussions from either the city or county on any of the sales, nor does BVSD appear to have any compunction about violating past dedication agreements. Examples include Palo Park and Washington School. Now, the Lakeshore Estates dedication is up for sale, and it was also somehow subdivided in 2011 with water and sewer put in by the city while it remained in the county to prep it for sale. In addition, the Twin Lakes 10-acre land dedication is in a holding pattern due to the County Planning Commission's decision not to upzone that land for annexation, which leads me to share information obtained through Cora regarding both the Lakeshore Estates, and which is also sometimes referred to as Hoover Hills, and Twin Lakes dedications. In 2014, Boulder Housing Partners was actively courting BVSD for their Twin Lakes dedicated land. There were multiple meetings, discussions, and communications between BHP and BVSD at this time, upon which BHP finally outlined a proposed land swap deal. At that time, BVSD wanted to purchase the old People's Clinic at 3303 Broadway. At the same time, BHP wanted to purchase BVSD's school dedications for their own use. So BHP came up with a land swap deal, which would have worked this way. BHP would directly purchase from BVSD 3 of the subdivided lots in the Lakeshore Estates dedication, plus the 10-acre Twin Lakes dedication, the real end goal for them. With that cash, approximately $2.9 million, BVSD would then be able to purchase the People's Clinic outright. BHP would then sell the 3 Lakeshore lots to individual home developers and land bank the Twin Lakes property. All of this appeared to take place behind closed doors and without public comment and without the knowledge of BVSD's school board. I believe the school board was misrepresented by Dr. Messenger and others on his staff as having approved some of these deals or sales when in fact they are not approved or even discussed by the school board. I would be glad to provide documentation pertaining to this. School dedications are not meant to be used as bargaining chips in land swap deals or any other such venture. In light of this and other information, I ask again that you please consider tabling this item for later and have more in-depth discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lambert. That concludes the speakers on agenda items. Moving to speaker on non-agenda items, Bob Belknap, who has been given an additional 2 minutes from Elizabeth Clark. Mr. Belknap, good evening. Welcome.
I'm Bob Belknap, Monarch parent. I'm here to talk about Monarch High School tonight. I'm going to tell you stories I hear, words I hear, things I've seen, stories about drugs, alcohol, sex, and racism. Things are too common in the world our kids go to school every day. When my kid tells me about drugs, I discovered I need a dictionary. I recently went to a pot shop to get educated. Jewels are not something you wear anymore. Jewels, jewel mods, pods, juice, nicotine, hits traded and searched for around campus. Ripping a fix, the smell of nicotine fixes in the bathroom, vodka in water bottles, lit kids at school, kids looking for a way to get lit at school, Snapchat videos of kids getting lit at school. Edibles, be careful. Taking a cookie at lunch, drugs are everywhere. Booty shorts, shorts that do not cover the booty. cleavage, exposed midriff, revealing clothes, not enough clothes, things I commonly see at drop off and pick up every day. Does this violate Monarch dress code? Quote, school dress should conform to recognized standards of decency, safety, modesty, and cleanliness. You tell me, what standard of modesty do booty shorts meet? And tell me, how do you expect a 16-year-old boy to pay attention in math class when he's staring at booty shorts? Things that happen at Monarch High, highly, highly inappropriate Snapchat pics passed around at school, sex acts at school, don't look surprised, it happens. Safe is sexy iPhone stickers passed out in health class. Why are we telling 16-year-olds condoms are sexy? Racist comments. Go back to Mexico. Are you legal? Drop your book, you must be Mexican. Chronic routine racist stupid. Funny? You tell me. Not funny to my Mexican daughter. Random meanness, social media bullying, sabotage, kids using safe to tell to get kids in trouble with the police for things they did not do. Teachers are next. Kids lying about kids to get out of trouble. Searching her backpack is something my daughter now does because she's afraid someone is going to put something in it. Pervasive. It's no different at Boulder High or Fairview. Some say worse, I don't know. All our kids are subjected to this. There is no way around it for them. You may ask why this isn't getting reported. Good question. Reporters get bullied 24/7. If you turn a kid in, their friend group turns on you. My daughter's still getting bullied for reporting something 3 years ago. The school cannot stop it. Is this acceptable to Monarch High School? Is this acceptable to the school board? Is the culture at Monarch acceptable to the city of Louisville? I'm going to ask the school board what they think. I am concerned. It's not acceptable to me. I'm concerned about my daughter's well-being and safety at Monarch. Literal truth. The problem starts at home. Solutions need to come from home. I'm not a perfect parent. My kid's not a perfect kid. But the pervasive drug, alcohol, sex, and even racism problems at Monarch High make my job more difficult than it needs to be. I respectfully ask that, I believe the school board can and the school can do more. I respectfully ask that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Belknap. That concludes public participation. Appreciate hearing from both our speakers this evening, and we'll move to the next item on our agenda, which is board communication. Board members, who would like to begin? Going once? Tom? Thanks.
First of all, thank you to both of our speakers and the important and disturbing issues that you raise. I'm surprised. I don't know what to say about it. I'm going off the school board, but over the 8 years here, I have seen these problems come. I think that the school board can be the leader and should be the leader. I think that we have, as a district, fallen down in a lot of what we called climate surveys, and those things are going to be reinstituted. That helps the board understand what the things going on in our schools, whether it be bullying or drugs or alcohol or any of those issues. So I encourage you to keep pushing on the school board and holding the school board accountable for these issues. On a lighter note, this is my last, my and Jenny's last really official school board meeting. Next one is sort of a changeover, so it's not really but there are a number of things that are on the agenda tonight. I thank the board for putting on the agenda some things I've been passionate about, so we'll talk about those a little bit later. When I started on the school board, I did not expect the things that we would go through in the 8 years that I've been here. I mean, we've been through now 3 superintendents, talking about a 3rd one. Various serious problems at our schools and within our district, bond elections, mill levy overrides, a recession. I mean, I did not anticipate the level of real serious issues and problems that the board would have to address. So first of all, I want to thank all of you guys for dedicating your time and effort. It is a big job. It is a job that we need to take seriously. We do have our community, our parents, and our students, lives that are affected in a great way, just like we hear now. And what are we going to do about these things? As a school board, we are all volunteers. And many of us have full-time jobs, and it limits the amount of time that we can actually spend on these issues. But I would hope and encourage all of the board members and the new ones coming in that we take a hard look at these issues. I believe that discussion and disagreement at the board table is healthy. We need to be respectful, but I think we need to talk over the issues and understand those issues and search for appropriate solutions for our unique problems in our unique district for our unique students. So it has been an experience for me that I'll never forget. But thank you. But in that regard, one last thing. I don't know if you guys read the Daily Camera this morning. There was a story here that was actually picked up from the Denver Post, talking about protections against sexual harassment. I don't know if you guys had a chance to read that. If you haven't, please do. We are seeing what might be an explosion of things coming to light or allegations coming to light. I think there are 14 states now involved with state and local officials that are being accused. I'm not here to say whether these are valid or not valid. I think, though, that within our own state we're seeing this, and that's what this article talks about, but it's also very germane to things we go through as a school district and protections we can put in place. I'd just like to read you a few things out of here. I'll quote from this article. It says, the revelations on Monday prompted House Speaker Duran and Senate President Grantham to launch sexual harassment prevention initiatives. And they quoted, while we have a comprehensive awareness training and reporting system in place, recent events show that we can and should do better. Duran, House Speaker, said she wants a neutral third party to investigate sexual harassment allegations that would safeguard against any possibility or perception that leadership might make decisions for political reasons. I think, in our discussions over the past few months over ombudsman type of position, over compliance officer position, as we begin to look at our policies, I think our policies are good, and we might need some tweaks. We certainly need more training. But I would certainly encourage this board to go forward and seriously consider an independent arm that can do exactly what the House Speaker is talking about. I mean, they're talking about doing this now in our state, at our state capitol. And it seemed to be unique when we talked about it at the school board, but I think it's very appropriate and very timely that we should launch forth. So if I were to give you a parting charge, it's, take that up, and it's a very serious issue that we need to be all aware of, and it's something that we need to provide safety for, our staff as well as our students. And the actions this board will take and the policies and provisions that you put in place will shape the future in this area. So I just encourage you guys to take this matter seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Much, Tom, and we'll have a reception for Tom and Jenny in a couple weeks, but let me just say I've appreciated serving with you very much. I've learned from you, and I'm grateful for your service. Other board members? Richard?
Thanks, Sam. I'm still trying to process what the second speaker was talking about, and I forgot your name. Bob? It kind of knocked the wind out of me, even though I'm not naive not to know that things like that aren't happening in our schools. But to hear it from a parent around all those different topics, I think is something that we as a board should really take a lead on and start having conversations on how we can do a lot of that type of prevention work, working with our schools, working with our students, working with our community. Earlier I mentioned Communities That Care out of Lafayette. I met with a pastor this morning for coffee, and we were talking about what some of the parents are trying to do in the city of Lafayette as it relates to drugs. And the conversation really turned around in terms of looking at the legalization of marijuana, for example, and the fact that it is legal here in Colorado, but there's a group of parents that are concerned, even though it's legal, that many of our parents probably don't have the right language or the right tools to be able to talk to their own kids about the use and even some of the legal ramifications in the use of marijuana. And that conversation really turned into talking about Monarch. And he mentioned that the opioid problem that we have in our society today, and he said that he's done some research on it, and the fact that the opioid problem is really hitting some of the more well-to-do families than it is our lower-income families, and that doctors are prescribing opioids to the wealthier families versus the lower-income families. And that is a big issue at Monarch. That's what he was saying. And now that I heard you talk about that, I said, wow. So I really do think that we ought to start thinking about what is it that we can do as a board to start looking at working with the community, working with our students around the drug issue. Now getting to the racism issue, being a Mexican American in Colorado and having been here for 7 generations, I still hear that comment in terms of Mexican go home and all of that ugly stuff that happens in our communities. I think that has to stop. And I think that in order for that to stop, we have to start educating our own students, those that are saying those or using that type of language in our schools. And that takes time. And I think that we need to start looking at what's in our curriculum. How do we work with all those issues within our own curriculum so that those things don't happen or stop happening. Around the dress code issue, dress codes have been around for a long, long time. A lot of people have different opinions around dress codes. Some parents will come up and fight if you were to set a dress code that disallowed some of the stuff that you're talking about, because for them it's an expression of their own self. And I know that that's been happening for many, many years in Boulder Valley School District. That's a tough one, but I think that we should take a look at it and start thinking about what is that we can do around that. And I'm going to turn towards Tina, who is our policy person here. There may be a policy in place already that I'm not familiar with, but if there is, I think we need to adhere to it and make sure that our schools, our administrators, our teachers, our students, our parents know about the policy if in fact it is in there. If it's not, I think we should start looking at the possibility of a policy. Thank you very much for your comments. And I want to thank Tom and Jenny for for your patience and for allowing me to muddle through some of the stuff around the last couple of years. You know, you've been around 8 years. You know a lot about being on the board and all of that. And I truly appreciate our coffees that we had together and the advice that you gave me during this last couple of years. And I'm sure you're looking forward to all your extra time that you're going to have available in your lives from now on. I also want to do a shout out to Jeff Leonard, who is the CAD teacher at Broomfield High School. I went to go visit along with our wonderful superintendent here. We went and spent a good chunk of time in Jeff's classroom and learned a lot about what computer, what is it? CAD, computer assisted design program. And try to look at what they were doing in the classroom, what they were learning in the classroom, and the possibilities of different types of certificates that could be granted to these particular students, and that many of these students are going to end up at the School of Mines, and they're already going to be a heads up of other students because they've had this class. And then I was asking our great teacher, Jeff Leonard, if there had been any communications with even our own corporations or computer corporations in our community, and if there had been any discussions around maybe some possible apprenticeships or possible internships, et cetera. And he said he hadn't done that, but that he's going to start thinking about doing that. So, but it was a great program, and as I was there, they did this little wonderful thing for me, and I'm going to pass it on so you all can take a look at it. It might, very quickly, they just did this on their little computer stuff, and I really appreciated it. But I want to thank Ginger and Jeff and Cindy for arranging that for me. I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Other board members? Tina.
Yeah, I think we have a chance to thank Tom and Jenny next week. Is that correct?
2 weeks from now.
Fabulous, 2 weeks. So I'm going to hold my comments until then. Thank you to both of the speakers. It's good to see you again, Susan. I think we've met before. And also just on the drugs and alcohol, as much as I love this board, where I'd really like to be tonight is the Parent Engagement Network is having at middle school a talk for parents about drugs and alcohol. And as you know, my daughter is well, not you, but I think everyone knows my daughter's an 8th grader at Casey Middle School. There are certainly drugs there. And I thought the principal did a really good job communicating out to the parents these opportunities to learn more about how we're dealing with this as a community. And I don't know if it's the age of my daughter, but I do feel like I'm hearing more and more stories going on, and I would like us to talk about it. And my hope is just that I understand the landscape a little better. I've brought up the policy around, drugs in schools before. It's probably not a policy issue in this case. It's a practice issue, and how do we deal with it in this community? And I think there are lots of different organizations working on the issue, and I think at some point we'll probably need to understand how we're all fitting together and who's really making progress on that issue. So, but thanks for bringing it up. It's certainly something that's top of mind.
Thanks, Tina. Kathy?
I'll join, sorry, I have to scoot in with my boot. Join Tina in delaying my thanks to Tom and Jenny when we have our celebration of their service, but I have greatly enjoyed working with both of you and getting your wise counsel and advice as we kind of venture down this road the last couple of years. So thank you, but I'll say more later. And thank you to our speakers for coming and sharing the information with us. And on the drugs and alcohol issue, I have been going to the parent meetings at Fairview and hearing the exact same concerns. Parents have been contacting me, and I have to say that I learned some things when the principal brought drug paraphernalia to teach the parents what it looked like. What does vaping look like? I didn't know what a Juul was either. What do the Juuls look like? How pervasive it is, and they're starting to have classroom discussions about it all at the same time, so that students are starting to be more aware of it. And I agree with Tina that we need to figure out who our community partners are, because any of us alone aren't going to be able to solve that problem, but it is increasingly, I'm hearing it more and more, a concern for parents. And so what we can do as a community to try to make sure our children are not coming to school high or stoned or whatever the terms are these days. Those are dating me when I say that. What we can do as a community, because I share your concern. I have a son at Arapahoe and a daughter at Fairview, and I think we do need to look at it, but as a board, we're also constrained by what we can do, but as parents and as community members, we also wear lots of hats that we can all pull together to try to figure out what we can do to work on this issue. So thank you for coming and sharing that. I'm sure it was hard to do, to talk about those hard issues, but those are the issues that we need to be addressing. And I do support some of the efforts like I brought about earlier that like at Fairview, they have the student-led Take Back the Night, and I don't know if it's going to be overly successful, but I know that for the first time in 14 years, they had a homecoming dance where nobody was busted for drugs or alcohol, which I thought was a good statement and a good move forward. Doesn't mean that it wasn't happening off campus, but it certainly didn't happen on campus, so I think these student-led efforts are also part of the whole effort that we need to engage in. So thank you for bringing that forward, and I look forward to working collaboratively with everybody to try to solve that issue. So I appreciate you coming forward and talking with us.
Thanks, Kathy. Other comments, board members? Shelley?
Yeah, where to begin? Susan Lampert, thank you very much. You certainly educated me on that topic, and I think that I'll reserve my comment for later in the agenda when we get to that on the consent agenda. Bob, thank you so much for coming forward. I also have two fairly recent graduates from Boulder High, so I've been aware of these kinds of issues for a while now. And I've thought for a while that this isn't really it's too widespread, it's too comprehensive to address it strictly in a disciplinary way. It feels to me that what needs to happen is more of a cultural assessment of our schools, and that this board could play a role in making sure that that's done. We used to have fairly extensive climate surveys where we would hear about some of this. We used to get reports on the youth behavior risk survey. I haven't seen one of those in a while. I'm not sure where we are. I know we opted to participate in that, but I haven't seen any feedback recently about that. So I think that we, as a board, need to pay more attention to that. And I do think that we could do more in the way of assessing the situation so that we know specifically how to address that. And while I agree that there are student-led groups that address this are really important, because I believe that at some point it just needs to be made not cool to do it, like smoking is no longer cool for most of the population. So I think we need to generate that kind of sort of peer pressure on kids, but I think it's up to the adults to lead that, and I appreciate you bringing it forward so we can discuss this again, I hope, as a board. The other thing I just wanted to comment briefly on was I was just looking at our fourth quarter financial results, and it looks like that we ended up with a much bigger budget surplus than we projected. So our fourth quarter results show an ending balance of $10.6 million above our reserves and the budgeted ending fund balance. And I know that some of that is reserved for a number of things, but I'd like to remind the board that there were some very important initiatives that we did not fund back when we were discussing this coming year's budgets, and because we weren't really projecting this surplus. So I'd just like to know when we can have our next conversation about maybe revisiting those initiatives and seeing if we could now fund some of those.
Yes, and we can ask Bill Sutter this evening. We don't actually have 10 million. It's not 10.
I know there's
right.
a part
okay.
of that. That's
great. And yes, if the board is interested in talking about that, we can talk about which initiatives. The other thing I wanted you to know was our students are participating in the Healthy Kids Survey, and we will have those results. We just don't have them yet.
Okay. When do those come out?
I will have to check tomorrow.
Okay.
And verify.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. And then just to address one of your comments earlier, Tom, and you and Jenny, you will be missed. So I'll tell you that now, and I'll tell you that in 2 weeks again. But I just agree with you 100% about the need for us to put additional safeguards in place to protect students and staff from any sort of harassment. And I know the district has those safeguards in place, but I believe that we need even stronger ones and even more training on those subjects. So thanks for that reminder. I think it's not far from all of our minds anyway, but thank you again for bringing that up.
Thanks, Shelley. Jenny?
I'm sorry. I'm really impressed with the level of concern that my fellow board members have shown tonight with some of the issues that were raised by Mr. Belknap, and I won't add any more to that. But I look forward to watching from afar some really good conversation going on about that. I'd like to say that I'm finishing up my time on the board on a high note, and it's been an honor. I will say it's been an honor to serve with everybody on this board. We're all highly dedicated people with with the same kind of passion for public education that I have. So I'm going to miss all of you on my Tuesday nights. I just don't think there's anything more important than government does than educating our kids both to be good citizens and to have full lives. We say it well in our mission statement. I can't say it better than that. But I would like to mention that one of the things I got to do in the last couple of weeks was to visit Broomfield Heights Middle School, where they had a career day, which is really a way fun thing. I recommend, if you get a chance to go next year, it's fun. They dedicate the morning to various members of various representatives of various professions come and talk to the students about their jobs and what their jobs involve and how they got into those jobs. And we had a lot of entrepreneurs. We had a woman on stilts because she works for the aerial dance company in Boulder. That was kind of cool. We had the sports editor for the Denver Post who came and talked, and that was the morning that they had just replaced Trevor Simeon with Brock Osweiler. So I felt like I knew almost as much about sports as my kids do for 1 minute, and there's just all kinds of interesting professions and careers, and to hear the great, to see the engagement of the kids and hear the questions they asked. It's a really good way to spend a morning, I think, for middle school kids as we sort of get kids prepared for life. We think about the K-12 and career preparation. That's one of our goals. So I really enjoyed that and recommend that you, or if there's a middle school near you that does a similar program, you try to attend. It's really fun. And Richard, I was so glad to hear that you went to Broomfield High School. I always get really excited when any of my fellow board members make the long drive out from Boulder to visit Broomfield or any of our East District schools. So that was, although you don't have to drive all the way from Boulder, I know. So anyway, you're right. We do have some great programs in all of our high schools, but in Broomfield especially. And I'd like to thank Bill Sutter for his great letter to the editor in the Camera this week that did as good a job of explaining the School Finance Act in 200 words or less, or 200 words or less. 300 words or less. It was as succinct, and I think I even posted it on my Facebook page. Anyway, so thanks for that letter explaining why, even though assessed valuations have gone up, we have not experienced a $40 million windfall in Boulder Valley, if only we had. Let's see, what else do I have to say? I think I've thanked everybody for my opportunity to serve. Oh, and then just as a mention, there's a group of people that are being sponsored by Great Education Colorado, Table 18, that have been looking towards a ballot initiative in 2018, which would do something to correct the issues of school finance statewide. And apparently they have filed ballot proposals, a number of ballot proposals, some of them which have proposed some very creative solutions to Tabor and Gallagher without mentioning the need to raise taxes. And it's early days yet, but I think it's worth taking a look and sort of keep continuing to follow that work over time. I mean, for the first time, we've gotten things. I'm kind of excited that something's been filed this early, and we'll see. Hope springs eternal, I guess. And so you look cynical. So anyway, so that's all I have to say. And again, it's been a pleasure to serve with everybody. I'll miss you.
Thanks, Jenny. I appreciated serving with you and your dedication to our students, and I will miss you as well at the board table. And we'll all have more to say in a couple weeks on that. Kathy? Yeah, sure.
Jenny reminded me that Colorado Public Radio is starting a podcast this week on Tabor.
Oh, yeah.
And so for those of us who don't get enough of Tabor, it might be really interesting to listen to get some background and information on it. And then in regard to Shelley's point, it would be great if, when we figure out what our final budget number is, if we could get some staff recommendations as to what they think the best use of that money would be going forward, because I think it'd be really helpful to have those discussions guided by staff.
And I would just add congratulations to Donna Myers and Kitty Sargent as we say goodbye to Jenny and Tom. We're looking forward to swearing them in a couple weeks and having them join us in the work on the Board of Education. I also thank everybody who ran, Dean Vlahos, Raj Rawat, Alexandra Eddy, appreciative of people stepping forward and volunteering to serve in this manner. So congratulations to the two who will be joining us, and thanks to folks who put themselves out there for this effort. And, you know, I had a really great experience this morning. I'll just mention briefly because it pertains to Mr. Belknap's comments and Richard's as well. I was able to observe a Reading to End Racism lesson in a classroom at Crestview. Volunteer teacher, Jessica, in Ms. Baxter's third grade at Crestview, taught a lesson in racism and privilege very effectively. The third graders were engaged, and this is a wonderful program. I think that is a great example of partnership between our schools, volunteers from the community, and in this case, a nonprofit partner that is the YWCA. So I'm looking forward to getting further involved with that, and I think there are programs that can help address some of these problems. We just have to support them and be consistent so that the lessons these students learned today in third grade continue on as they mature. So look into Reading to End Racism if you aren't familiar with that program. It's excellent. Move now to the next item on our agenda, which is an information item on class size. This comes to us as one of the items that the board had prioritized during our quarterly planning discussions as a topic we wanted to delve into further. It's something Tom has been consistent as well, and so we've got it on the agenda here for some dialogue. And I think Dr. Stevenson, if you would like to begin, you provided us with some information. Tom has also provided some information.
First of all, I want to thank Mr. Myers. Much of the information we've provided is congruent. I think that class size is an important factor. It's an important factor for kids, teachers, and parents. I think the thing that we have to be very cautious about is believing that simply changing class size will change student achievement. What you have to think about is what kinds of teaching strategies are facilitated by smaller groups of children. And that's really where you get the changes in student achievement, is to think through, if we change class size, how will we change instruction? How do we change what teachers are doing so that you get larger effect sizes of the strategies? So let me give you an example. One of the things we know, John Hattie has done a lot of work around effect sizes of various strategies. And if you look at the strategy of giving effective feedback and goal setting, you get an effect size of approximately 0.7. That's compared to an effect size of class size without changing strategies, somewhere between 0.1 and 0.2. Now, I don't disagree with Mr. Myers that smaller class sizes are better than larger class sizes. But I think the question is, what do you do that changes instruction for children? If you have a smaller class size without effective instruction, you don't change student achievement. However, smaller class sizes can facilitate effective strategies and effective instruction. So it's not simply larger class size or smaller class size. It's smaller class sizes and what kinds of instructional strategies are you implementing. So that's and I think Mr. Myers' articles and the one that I gave you all talk about that. What can you do with fewer children? And that's really the critical variable, not is it 15, and really the class size research says 15 is where you see noticeable difference. So there is an expense. Is it worth it? I would never say it's not worth it. I think it takes a lot of conversation, and most importantly, What is it you expect to have happen in classrooms when you have fewer children in those classrooms?
Tina?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks, Tom, for sending these out in advance. It's really helpful. I think I'd read it already, though, but somehow. But so we've talked about class size for the 4 years that I've been on this board. And Sam, it's okay that you didn't recognize that I was reelected as well.
Congratulations.
That's fine.
And sympathy as well.
Yeah, thank you. I know, probably a bad decision, but and I think one of the and I look at. It's kind of what Dr. Stevenson was saying, but in a different way, is kind of what are the goals we're trying to achieve? And so we're going to be opening up the contract with the union, with the teachers union this year. And what I would really appreciate when we open up the contract and talk about what it looks like, because it's in the union contract where it stipulates some guidelines around class size in the elementary school, and then it goes on to describe the caseloads in middle school and high school for each of the levels, and I think there's some differentiation between some of the types of teaching that's being done already. But I would like to hear, for that discussion to include a discussion of is the way that we have this presented now, as we've agreed with our teachers, is it meeting the goals and is it meeting the needs of our teachers for achieving the goals that we've set out? And I think on December 5th, we're going to talk about our 5-year goals. And so those are related discussions because to your point, I think we need to think about, okay, so what is it structurally in our district, whether it's class size, whether it's paraeducator support, whether it's interventions for students with dyslexia, whether it's, more preschool slots. What are the things that are the barriers that we have right now? And I think class size should be a part of that discussion, but I don't think it's a standalone topic for me. The other thing I just wanted to read is how Cherry Creek they actually did a policy on class size. We don't have a policy on classes, and I don't know if we need one because it's in our union contract. But it says it made some broad themes around class size, but then it says that class size should do the following, or should consider the following, which are the academic and curricular goals of the district, the type of class load that will help the teacher be most effective with the students, the needs of programming in the academic core classes, the age and needs of students in the class, required preparation and assessment time for the class, physical makeup in the classroom, and then the anticipated enrollment growth. And I liked that language because it talked more about what the needs are, not just talking about class size, which is, as a standalone for me, doesn't mean much because I don't know what I'm going to get for it. So my suggestion is that we ask during this contract negotiation to talk about, is this contract meeting the needs of our teachers and achieving the goals that we're going to talk about on December 5th? And it's just one of the many different things in the tool set of this district for making sure that we're getting the outcomes that we want and that we know that we're not getting across the board right now. So that was kind of the way I was looking at it. The other piece is, and this is getting a little bit more nitpicky, and I was trying not to go here, but I am anyway. There's another school district. I was reading class size policy around different school districts that kind of mirror our socioeconomic profile. And one of them just sets a policy that says, that has a cap for K through 5, not this K1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I thought that was an interesting idea because it would give the principal more autonomy to set class sizes based on the needs and challenges they see in those grades. And that was just I've always wondered whether the principal has too much to juggle with 3 different class size ratios in a 6-year span. So those were my comments on class size.
Thanks, Tina. Other comments? Tom?
Thanks. Thanks so much for allowing me to speak. As you know, this has been an issue that's been on my mind since I started on the school board. And been a proponent of smaller class sizes. And for me, I have 3 sons that went through Boulder Valley School District and graduated, very successful, and the school district did a good job in educating them. But what I saw is, as a parent, and also by helping in classrooms, is that teachers were overwhelmed by the workload they had. Workload they had is with the number of students, the number of struggling students, the number of behavioral problems that they had to deal with, such that all of these teachers are very fine, dedicated people, but they were limited by time and ability to really address, the needs of their students like they would have liked to. And so that's why a number of us always volunteer in the classroom, try to help out, just like what you were talking about, Sam. Those are great programs. Also, my wife being a teacher, I saw it from her eyes. She taught in the classroom for many, many years. And, with more students come more paperwork, more strategies, trying to have time for more interventions. And I think what you said, Cindy, is true, is that, the style is really what it's about and how you address that. And with smaller class sizes, then the teachers have more time, individual time for working with students, for interventions, for meeting, specific needs than they would otherwise. So for me, coming on the school board, it was just something I just thought naturally, is a gut feeling, yeah, it makes a difference. As I got on the school board, then every time we seemed to have this conversation, it would come up, well, gee, if we change our ratio by one, that's $3 million or $6 million. Bill can quote the number, whatever it is, a large amount of money. And so the conversation kind of stopped. What I've always wanted to do is do what we have right now. Let's look at strategies that will affect the outcomes and success performance of our students. Decide on if they're good outcomes, and then figure out how you afford it. If it's a priority and you feel it's a good outcome, a good way of addressing your needs, then you go figure out how to afford it, rather than stopping by saying, "Oh, I just can't afford that." I don't like that mentality. One of the things that we did this year, and you guys were all involved, is that I had done some studies over the years looking at the sizes of our high school classes, particularly in freshman and sophomore language arts and mathematics. And we saw some very high class sizes in those very core subjects, 45, for example, in some cases. And so we decided as a board, let's try to make that 30 this year, and we put that in our budget. And I thank you guys for supporting all that. And our principals were able to do that. I mean, pretty close. I mean, we may have one or two that are 31, 32, but those are logistics of trying to craft a schedule. And so I will be very interested to see how we track then those students over the next 4 years. And I would like to see this done over a period of time, so that when the students that are freshmen now get to be seniors, how's their performance? How are their graduation rates? How are they doing in their classes? Did this have an effect? That was a piece of data that we could get that actually what we found out didn't cost us anything. Our principals were able to do that without costing us anything at all in terms of money. Now, there were hard choices to make, and I understand that. But when we began talking about these things, I thought, well, I'll do a study myself. I'm not a researcher. I don't have a background in education. I'm not a researcher in education, or anyway. But so that's what I did. And what I did is I went and tried to find, first of all, the folks in education that were well respected, that had done lots of research. Also, the ones that had done overlooking the various other studies that have been done, because I wouldn't have the capability to take an individual study and say, how this was done and what the results were and how we can apply that across to many schools. So I was able to find some very, what I consider very high quality academic papers, peer reviewed, and top figures in the field that had looked at this problem, looked at the studies, and drawn some conclusions. And so two of those are the ones that I put in your packet. There's one in 2014 called Does Class Size Matter? By Dr. Diane Whitmore Schnazenbach. And she's the director of the Institute of Policy Research and faculty fellow at Northwestern University. She's a Margaret Walker Alexander professor in the School of Education and Social Policy. Very high credentials and has done a lot of work. And I just want, I'm not going to go through everything, you know, and you guys have read this, and I don't want to read those for you again, but I thought for the purposes of people that are listening, maybe we ought to say a few things just so they can get some context. Dr. Schnazenbach says the critics are mistaken, class size matters. Research supports the common sense notion that children learn more and teachers are more effective in smaller classes. Scholars generally agree that true randomized experiments, such as the Project STAR class size experiment described, and I'll describe that in a minute, are the gold standard for isolating causal impacts. So let me just take a minute, and for people who don't know, I didn't know about this study. Project STAR was something that's put in place. It's called the Student-Teacher Achievement Ratio. It was done in Tennessee. As a 4-year longitudinal class size study funded by the Tennessee General Assembly, conducted by the State Department of Education, over 4,000 students in 79 schools were randomly assigned to different class sizes. And I won't go through the whole thing, but they were followed through from K through 3rd grade, and then followed up afterwards by many, many studies on what their performance were. When I talked to Dr. Schnazenbach, I talked to Dr. Mathis, who we'll talk about in a minute, and then I talked to Dr. Glass, which many of you may know. I found that he is one of the top leading figures in the class size studies. They all said this is the gold standard, and this is a study that has a lot of meat, it has controls, and you should pay attention to these results because they're valid. Now, obviously, you know, any kind of research like that is done with specific, you know, variables in mind they're examining, so they don't look over everything. And so it's hard to extrapolate sometimes, you know, from what they did in K through 3 to 8th grade or 10th grade or whatever. But nevertheless, I think some of these things are worth considering. Dr. Schnazenbach, her conclusions were, based upon the research literature that she studied, and she cited 41 references, so she did a lot of work and work that I couldn't do. She said the payoff from class size reduction is larger for low-income and minority children. And I actually called her and talked to her on the phone and exchanged many emails about this. And she said, you know, it really boils down to what Cindy said, because now the teachers have the time that they can do individualized strategies, assessments, interventions to meet the needs of the students. They actually have time to do that. And it is a different strategy because if you have that many kids, you can't do the same sort of thing, obviously. But having smaller number of classes, smaller class sizes allows that type of teaching. She said policymakers should carefully weigh the efficacy of class size reduction policy against other potential uses of funds. While lower class size has a demonstrable cost, it may prove the most or the more common effective policy overall. And you can read what she said about economic status and as they followed these children into their careers and where they went in their education is what she's referring to. She said the weight of the evidence suggests that class size impacts might be more or less linear across the range of class size observed in the literature, that is from roughly 15 to 40 students per class. And I talked to her about this. Says, what do you mean? She said, well, you know, the STAR study basically, you know, took some class size increments, you know, some that are around 15, some that are around 25, and did various things with that, but said, you know, a lot of people didn't extrapolate that it doesn't really do you any good until you get to 15. And I asked her about that, and she says, no, that's absolutely false. Says what the literature supports is that for every, you know, one student less, you get incremental gains in the performance and outcomes of those students. And so when I talked to actually Dr. Mathis, Dr. Mathis is now the vice chairman of the State Board of Education in Vermont, so, and you know, a very knowledgeable gentleman, and sounds like he's been around a long time and knows a lot. And it was very enjoyable actually talking with him. And you know, he basically said the same thing, that the STAR study is the one that should be looked at. There are a lot of other studies done that aren't nearly as valid or that try to extrapolate information. the metadata analysis that you discussed, Cindy and Mr. Hetty's work. When I talked to Gene Glass, he told me, he said, I invented that. So I invented that back, and you probably know this, in 1982 or something, and wrote a paper where he did 100 different ones of these. And it said that the problem with a lot of the work that's done these days is the weighting of the metadata analysis. In other words, they weight the STAR study, which was obviously a huge study, well controlled and well monitored, and they weight it the same as a doctoral thesis, which is done over a short period of time. And so then the area you get into is trying to do a metadata analysis, is weight those the same, and the results, aren't valid. So he actually had a lot to say about that. He wrote a book with a colleague about 50 myths in education. And I didn't include that because I was worried about some copyright stuff. But he actually sent me the chapter on class size. And I got to read that. I'm skipping forward just a little bit. Gene Glass is his name, and his colleague was Dr. Berliner, David Berliner. And he's professor of education emeritus at Arizona State, former dean of education school there, past president of American Educational Research Association, American Psychological Association, just goes on and on, the credentials of these people. And Gene is a professor at the University of Colorado. I'm sure you've seen him and talked to him a number of times, Kathy, senior researcher at the National Education Policy Center. And they both talked to what Gene says, and I quote here, he said, the Project STAR is the best designed and most respected studies examining the effects of class size reduction. He goes on to say that positive long-term results were attained on a study in Wisconsin as well, another one in England, and that the latter found that for every 5 additional students, there was a 25% increase in off-task behavior. In other words, you take a class, add 5 students to it, and then that the off-task behavior then increases by 25%. And he goes on and says almost exactly what for decades teachers have been telling all who would listen. He went on to say with smaller class sizes, teachers believe they are able to contribute more significantly to the students' learning, and research backs up that claim. So Dr. Mathis, he actually cited 28 different references in his paper of different studies. His was done in 2016, whereas the previous one was done in 2014. And he concludes and recommends, he says, there is little evidence indicating that other reforms would be more effective at a lower cost than class size reduction. Class size is an important determinant of student outcomes, and one that can be directly determined by policy. All else being equal, lowering class sizes will improve student outcomes. The payoff from class size reduction is greater for low-income and minority children, same conclusion others are drawing. Conversely, increases in class size are likely to be especially harmful to these populations who are already more likely to be subjected to large classes. So I won't go any more. You can read all these details, but I would like to see and encourage this board to go forward and have some real serious discussions over that, how these things could be implemented in our schools, how perhaps maybe we could partner with the community and bring in some of these folks that obviously have studied a lot and have a lot of experience, and have some discussions with the board, discussions with our community. I don't know, maybe Community Foundation, Richard, or some of the other folks could help and work on that to bring those in. But that's just a recommendation I would have for the board. So I've taken up enough time.
I appreciate it, Tom, and obviously a very critical issue, and thank you for sharing that research. Are there other board members who would like to comment? Richard?
Yeah, I think partnering with community groups, et cetera, to bring in people that have the expertise, the knowledge, but looking at our staff, Sam, what would they recommend also in terms of trying to bring in experts to start looking really, really seriously about this whole notion of class size. I'm married to a retired teacher that taught for 28 years in Boulder Valley schools, and if I was to ask her that question, she would certainly say, oh yeah, reducing a kid by 1 in the classroom is going to make a lot of difference for me as a teacher. and for the rest of the students that I'm working with. So reduction of class size, I think, is a no-brainer. I think that we all understand that, yes, the less number of children you have in your classroom, the better off the kids are going to be, and the more attention the teacher can place on those particular students. But I also think that we need to start talking about, and I think some of the research that you're referring to also gets into that, what are the other external factors? I mean, there's a lot of variables, you know, in terms of working with children in a classroom and trying to figure out what's better for these particular students, et cetera. Poverty comes into the picture. Second language learners comes into pictures. All of those different factors come into helping our kids do better in school. And we all know that when children come into the classroom at the preschool, kindergarten to third grade, they're really learning how to read, and then after third grade, they're reading to learn. And that's something that a lot of organizations have gotten behind on in terms of even trying to reduce the opportunity or achievement gaps in our systems. But I do believe that we need to start looking at all the variables as it relates to doing the best for the kids that are in most need for learning. In our system, we do have, 7 Title I schools?
7 or 8.
8 Title I schools. And I believe that all 8 Title I schools are school-wide Title I schools. And I'm looking at Sandy because I'm not sure what the answer is. Okay. And I think the point that I'm getting to is I think we need to look at what's going on with our school-wide Title I schools, for example, because they are designed to reduce class size. They are designed to do a lot of that work that we're talking about and start looking at what are some of the variables that are involved in the school-wide Title I schools. And I think we have the makings of a good pilot project, if you will, or at least some observations in terms of what are the Title I schools doing, because you're talking about a lot of kids that are in poverty kids, you're talking about a lot of kids that are English language learners, and all the children that are in those schools receive the same benefits. It's not like they're targeted Title I kids where just the Title I kids are getting the benefit. But I think that's a good beginning in terms of trying to figure out how we can work around the whole notion of class size. But I do think that it's a good idea to start thinking about ways that we could bring some of the experts into the system here and talk to us, educate us, working with our staff, and see where we can go from there, because there's so much in the research. And everyone's got a different outcome in terms of the research that they're doing. But I do believe that anytime you reduce the class by one student, it's going to have a payoff.
Thanks, Richard. Other comments? Kathy?
I just want to say thanks for the rich discussion, and that I was really happy, Tom, when I saw that you were listing research by my good friend and colleague, Bill Mathis. I've known him for many years and have relied on him a lot for guidance in issues around accountability and class size and all of that. And you went to the National Education Policy website, and what I would like to refer us all to is an article written by Jennifer Rice King called "What Would It Take to Build the Balance Wheel?" And it's kind of what you were talking about, Richard, which is there are a lot of factors other than just class size that affect our student outcomes. And I think that in an environment of limited resources, we need to figure out what the best bang for our buck is. And one of them, I think we've all touched on, is full-day kindergarten. And what does that look like, and have that conversation. Tom, it's funny, I kind of had this deja vu experience when you were talking about the STAR study, because during the Lobato trial, I can't tell you how often we fought about that. we took the position that class size did matter, and the Tennessee Star Study is the gold standard. There aren't many others that even come close to it, but the state took the position that a qualified good teacher, it doesn't matter what the class size is, so it kind of bridges some of the conversations that we've had here. And what I can tell you is that there's lots of ways to go about this. For example, in Vermont, where Dr. Mathis is on the Board of Education, they have a statute that limits class size, and they do it differentiated by the number of students that can be in a language arts class versus the number of students who can be in a mathematics or science class. You and I have talked, Tom, about the measures in Florida where they passed a measure the voters did to try to limit class size, and they broke it down by elementary, middle, and high, and that has not necessarily been met with any resounding success because it didn't come with an attached method of paying for all of that. So I think in our environment where we only have, as Shelley has pointed out, some extra one-time dollars, and we have the voters to thank for the mill levy dollars that we have, we still aren't going to be able to get to the class sizes that I think would make the most difference. So I think we need to have we have to have a robust discussion around what the best things are to move the dial on our achievement gap and our opportunity gap. And so again, if you read Dr. Rice King's article, she talks about things such as wraparound services, which I've talked about some here, focusing on early interventions on math and literacy. And I just also want to push back a little, Tom, because I have a daughter who's a sophomore at Fairview, and you can't say that changing the class size ratios for the freshman and sophomore came at no cost, because now the upper classes, the math and English classes, have 40 to 45 kids in those classes as a way to try to balance the request that we made to have the smaller class sizes in the earlier grades. And unless we change the staffing ratios there, you push on one side and you're going to have an impact on another. And I think we need to be really careful about maybe what are unintended consequences when we put in place what sounds like a good policy and we find out that there are other impacts on the school and on the students in that school. So I just think we have to be really careful when we have those conversations. So, and then I do want to echo what Tina said, which is as we start to have these conversations, I really will rely on our teachers and what they expect to be the best outcomes and what we can do to support them, because I do think our class sizes are big. When I talked to Bill today and I told him what our class sizes were, you could hear an audible gasp on the other side of the phone. But he also comes from Vermont, where there's 70,000 students total. And their average PPOR in Vermont is $18,000 a student, which you can't even get your mind around. I know, isn't that right, Sam? They don't have a teacher shortage there. Their average teacher salaries are somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000. So it's just really interesting to have those conversations across the country, but we aren't going to get there. So having our conversation with our teachers, I'm looking forward to hearing your wife's input on what the best place to put our limited resources are to try to close our really wide achievement gap. So thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate your passion on this issue, I really do, and the effort that you've put into it, because once you dive in, there's really no bottom, is there, Tom? And and I would be happy to try to get some of the experts from NEPC to come and talk to us. They have a conference here once a year. And so David Berliner comes to that, Bill Mathis comes to that, so we might be able to coordinate something around when they come to try to get them to do it, and we wouldn't necessarily maybe have to pay all of the travel expenses if we could figure out a way to coordinate that. So it might be a good way to do that.
Yeah, I think so. I think, Kathy, when I talked to Bill, I was telling him, hey, you know, we got our class sizes down from, you know, in the 40s to the 30. And he kind of groaned and says, well, 30 is better than 40, you know. It is, you know, it's not what he would, you know, like to see in his experience, but it certainly is better than 40.
Yeah, and board members, I'm appreciating the importance of this issue and the rich discussion, and I do want to hear from the board members who haven't spoken yet and go around again if we need to, but I'm also cognizant of the large agenda we have remaining. So, Shelley and Jenny, do you have anything to add? Hey, Shelley? Yeah.
I don't know, Sam, we've been on the board together for 6 years, and I've been bringing this issue up for 6 years. I think when I first got on the board, I did a complete lit review of all of this. And so, Tom, this is great, great reminder. And at the time, in order to convince the board of how serious I thought this issue was, I surveyed 25 teachers. I don't know if you recall, and I typed out their responses to my question, which was I had heard from yet another superintendent that you can, there's no point in reducing class sizes unless you could get it down to 15 or 16. And so the question I asked these 25 teachers was, if you had 35 kids in your class and you could get it down to 18, would that be an improvement? And every single one of them came back and said, class size is the most important thing that you could do as a board member, reducing class size. That has a huge impact. And every one of them told a story of something they could not do as well as they wanted to do because of the class sizes that they have. So that, when you say, Kathy, you would love to hear from the teachers on what they think about this, I can tell you what the teachers think about this because I did that survey and I've talked to a number of them over the years, and they pretty much all feel the same way about class size. And I also, a couple of years ago, you may remember, I sat here and I told you about a teacher who called me and said, Shelley, I want you to know that I'm leaving the teaching business. I am a middle school math teacher, and I have 37, 38, and 36 kids in my middle school math classes, and I can no longer do it. I don't feel like I'm a good teacher anymore, and so I'm going to be leaving the district. And I reported that at this board table, and she indeed does live in another state and has given up the teaching profession. And I don't think, honestly don't think that there was any other reason other than she was completely overwhelmed and felt like she was letting her kids down because of those class sizes. And I think, Kathy, having had, kids like you in high school, I know that long before we initiated these freshman limits on math and LA classes, that class sizes were in the 40s in the high school because my kids had class sizes in the 40s even 4 or 5 years ago. So this has been a continuing problem in this district, and I think it's there are some things this board can do. This is a policy issue, and Richard, to your point that there are other variables that come into play. I think that it's unrealistic to think that this board's going to fix poverty or that this board's going to fix the fact that kids come to our district without knowing the English language and have to catch up. And so I think we should rely on the research that says the number one thing that helps those kids that are living in poverty or can't speak English is lower class size. So until we can fix the bigger issues, I think we should concentrate and do our best to try and fix this problem in our district and make it one of our highest priorities.
Thanks, Shelley. Jenny?
So I've really enjoyed the conversation tonight. I think there's a lot of thoughtfulness that has gone into it, and I think everybody agrees that all things being equal, smaller classes are better than larger classes. Sometimes the problem, though, is all things are not equal. And I'm finding it really difficult to have this conversation in a vacuum because it's easy just to say that class size is should be our number one priority. But at different times I've also heard the same teachers who say class size is really important, and the same staff members who say that's important also come to us and say, and the same parents who say that's really important also come to us and say, I really want full-day kindergarten. That's really important. Which actually, when you think about it, is a way of reducing student-teacher ratios, because one thing that happens with half-day kindergarten is you might have small classes, but teachers have 50 students. But that's just a parenthetical remark. Or teachers will say, we really need counselors in our school. I would prioritize that over, if I could choose one more teacher in our school or one more counselor, I would choose one more counselor. And I think that was part of the conversation we had last spring, was prioritizing that. Or having teachers say, I really need some professional development. I mean, that was something we struggled with. Another thing we've struggled with in this district forever is not adequately funding professional development. And I've been pleased in my years on the board to see us take some real steps forward in that area. And I know that there's some real need to for additional professional development to help us utilize the innovation spaces we're putting into our schools. And I think that's money well spent. It kind of goes to Cindy's comment that it's not, that while class size is important, you also then have to have good, good quality instruction with that small class size. I'd like to also remind us that we have the best teachers in the state. In a state that's struggling with real teacher shortages, we are not, because we pay very well. But that imposes a cost in terms of class size. I mean, I think we should be honest about that. It may very well be worth it. So all those things have to be weighed against one another, and I think we all struggled with that last year. Putting money into dyslexia, which provided some one-on-one instruction, but it didn't reduce class size overall. But I think we all felt like that additional tutoring was certainly well worth it. So I think that as you go forward as a board, you just have to have these conversations in context, and you may very well decide that in some instances you may want to invest in additional teachers. And one of the places where we've talked about this, and we talked about it last year, was we had a memorandum, MOU committee talking about devoting additional resources to some of our high need schools. And that might be a place where we could target some class size reductions if the budget permitted. But again, we would have to decide, what price we wanted to pay in terms of other programs. And I would just like to suggest that for a model, we could look at Horizons K-8 within our own district, which, as I recall, at the time it was established as a choice school, and before it became a charter, it started out, its sole purpose was to keep class sizes low, because at that time, in the 90s, a long time ago, 20 years ago, class sizes had been increased, and a group of parents and teachers got together and made some choices to keep class sizes low at this particular choice. I mean, at the time they did away with, they didn't have a principal. I think they do now. They've sort of come around and said, even at the expense of having some smaller classes, we need a full-time administrator. But we might look at, over the years, the choices that Horizons has made to keep class sizes low, and the places where they've decided it's worth it and the places where they've decided it's not worth it. I just think that would be instructive. So I will suggest that. Again, I look forward to following the conversation from afar. It's a tough one because we do have limited resources.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. Good discussion, and I think it informs our budget discussions, our work with our professional association. I certainly would be in favor of more discussion with local researchers and our professional staff as well. Is there anything, board members, you feel you need to contribute at this time, or can we say to be continued and move to the next item on our agenda? Sounds like we can. And thanks, Tom, for bringing us the research, and thanks, Dr. Stevenson, as well, for research you brought to our attention. The next item is an information item on the Wilson intervention, the adoption of that intervention strategy. We'll hear an update. Dr. Stevenson, you need to set the stage.
I am happy to set the stage. Our special education staff has worked hard in the implementation of the Wilson Reading Program. And I thought it's been very interesting to me because I took Wilson for granted. But Boulder Valley is just beginning that process. And I think we've had a staff that has worked hard, worked excellently, worked closely with our schools to make sure that the program is implemented well. So I'm going to turn it over to you all and say thank you for being here.
Good evening, Fuqua, Dr. Stevenson, Board of Education. My name is Dennis Rastetter. I'm the Executive Director of Special Education. It's my pleasure to be here in front of you this evening to give you an update to our previous presentation to you back in August around the work that we've done since then in implementing our Wilson Reading intervention update. So with that, and I'd like to go ahead, Michelle, please introduce yourself. Yes.
I'll introduce myself, Michelle Brenner, Director of Special Ed for Instructional Development. Thanks for having us back here. We're pleased to give you our updates. Things are going well. We're going to start with talking about the training that has happened so far. We adopted two types of Wilson programming. I'll talk about Wilson Reading System, which was adopted grades 2 through 5, again through special education resource teachers. So we had the 3 training dates, September 5th, 6th, and 7th. And we trained 29 special education resource teachers and 1 of our district specialists in the Wilson Reading System over those 3 days. We also had 6 resource teachers who had been previously trained in the program, so in total we now have 36 educators, resource teachers for the most part, trained in this program. 10 of those are moving forward into the Wilson Level 1 certification program, which is a full-year intensive certification in this intervention. So they're deep into that work, and we hope that they'll have that completed before the next school year. And at the elementary level, we have 1 or more resource teachers now implementing the Wilson Reading System at every elementary, with the exceptions of Charters, Gold Hill, and Jamestown. In Gold Hill and Jamestown, there's just some logistical challenges with part-time special ed teachers, so we're going to keep working through that.
At the secondary level, we've implemented or working to implement the Wilson's Just Words program, which will be implemented in grades 6 through 12. The training for that staff happened on October 17th and 18th. And it included 29 resource teachers and, again, 1 district specialist to support those teachers in implementation. At the middle and high school level, we have 1 or more resource teachers trained at all schools, with the exception of some charters and Boulder Universal. The implementation plan is a little different at the secondary level versus elementary in that we'll be rolling out the actual implementation of the plan, of the programming, beginning second semester. And so we're targeting their academic support classes, or ASC classes, to be that time frame in which, in student schedules, where we'll provide that direct instruction.
And I'll comment that that time has been well needed at secondary schools. There's a lot of logistical things to work through, and we're checking in with people and coaching with them and reaching out, how can we help you so you're ready for this implementation starting second semester. So then, now that we've done the training, we're working on our coaching plan. So we have our, as I said, 10 educators who are continuing through the practicum and certification process, which is fairly extensive. Of those elementary educators who are trained, the remaining 21, so about 20, and then our specialist are going to continue to collaboration sessions and peer coaching sessions. So that's something that Wilson doesn't provide, but we feel it's really important that we don't just train staff and then sort of leave them to it. So we're creating that and offering that through our specialists and our certified teachers, because we do have some certified teachers already. And then our secondary teachers, the 29 secondary teachers, will participate in 2 to 4 half-day coaching sessions offered by the Wilson Company, and those start in January to align with their rollout. So most teachers will get 2 half days where they can come and they observe a lesson that's being taught, and then they have a follow-up 2 hours to ask questions and work through challenges that they're having in their own implementation.
So at the elementary level, how many students have started? And so good news is your slide in front of you says 90 students, but when we presented this or put this together for you a couple weeks ago, we've had actually an additional 17 students participate. So now we're up to 107 total students who are accessing the Wilson Reading System at the elementary level. And again, the secondary students will start in January.
So then we're on to the data portion of this, which is in progress. Again, at elementary, where we're starting to implement, we're starting to also gather data. We are using the Word Identification and Spelling Test, or the WIST, as a pre- and post-assessment for some of the students. The reason we say some of the students is we have a lot of other assessments, so we want to streamline our assessment. We didn't require that everyone use this assessment. We required that they use some assessment to inform how they grouped and identified students, and that could look like existing assessment and this tool, which could supplement or be the assessment that they used. We believe our secondary teachers will use the WIST, especially at high school, because there's not as much existing assessment data to work with. But at elementary, it's a variety of things, including the WISC, the iReady, and the BAS assessment. And so we're gathering names of students and whatever data they have of those 3 assessment pieces to be able to track over a year or 2 years or through final implementation of the program, what sort of progress are we seeing for these students who are getting the appropriate implementation of the program. I think that's an important thing, because a lot of our teachers have asked, well, what if I'm doing some of the strategies or a little piece of the intervention? So we're not including those individuals in our data because it's not a true implementation of that program. High school's still working on the best data to track. So that may end up being WIST, pre-assessment and post-assessment, and it may be other things. We're still working on that. And we're also working with our CDE partners, Colorado Department of Education partners, to get PARCC growth scores for our SLD population really broken out. So that way we could see, does this intervention really make a difference on our state assessments as well?
Here, just to summarize some of the feedback we've received over the next 3 slides is just feedback we've received from those who are in the field currently implementing the Wilson Reading Program.
So just to highlight here, we added a picture of our fabulous trainer, Jeannie. There's been pictures throughout of our trainings just to make it less text heavy and show you some of the fun things that were happening. So there was a lot of support for our trainer. Students, just to highlight, students are reporting that they're feeling more confident even in these early stages. Teachers are enjoying some of the supplements to the program, and we're starting to see increases in various levels of fluency or decoding, depending on the student and the data and how far they have come with the program. There's also feedback around, we wish parents would hear that this takes time. It's not a thing that's going to happen and in a month we're going to see a massive difference. The Wilson Reading System at elementary in full would be about a 3-year program. So just to have some patience as we see positive things happening, but it really takes time to get the impact that we really expect it to have. I think it's me again.
Yes.
Okay. The costs, so far we've spent $130,000, including materials, training costs, and subs for those trainings. And we anticipate the remaining $30,000 to be spent on coaching support, sub cost for the coaching days so that we can provide subs back at school so people can come to the coaching opportunities, and replacement materials because we know that things get lost and they get broken, and we need to replenish that so that people start next year with the right materials.
So again, to remind you of our original purpose through all this, which was to fill the need for systemic and evidence-based interventions for students in K-12 who receive special ed services in the area of a specific learning disability in basic reading. Remember, the program focuses on phonics, phonemic awareness, and decoding. And our hope is to close the gap for students between their current reading level or their reading level and their current grade level, and to have them participate fully in grade level reading instruction. Again, our hope long-term is that this intervention will allow students to actually be exited from special education services as they close the gap with their same-age peers. Common intervention materials, again, having this system across our entire school system allows for consistency as kids move from grade to grade and even school to school, teacher to teacher, and the ability to provide coaching for fidelity of implementation. So we're talking the same language to all of our special education staff who are implementing the program across the entire district.
So our future needs, we know that this year was funded, and if we're going to continue the implementation in this way, there is continued cost that is not yet accounted for. We estimate that to be $170,000 to continue this rollout. Our plan, $170,000 for 2018-19, and then again in 19-20. In 19-20, that cost may go down depending on how far we get in this next year and how far we get with our own in-district trainer. We're working to build a trainer so that we have less costs going out and more that we can sustain on our own. And then $50,000 per year in ongoing cost. Again, if our in-district trainer works out the way we hope it will, that cost may go down, but that's our best guess at what those continuing costs will be.
Again, so just again, a thank you to the Board of Education for allowing us to move forward in this work. Dr. Stevenson for your support. Sam and Angel have been and partnering with us and how we do this work, so thank you for that. And then just our special ed team and our principals out in buildings who are helping to implement it. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Dennis and Michelle, for the update. We appreciate it. Board members, do you have any questions or comments? Tina?
Yeah, thank you for the update. And then I had one comment, I think I'd mentioned in another board meeting, but I have a friend who's a teacher who went through the training and she thought it was fabulous. So it was really good feedback. My two questions were, I noticed on the elementary training, it's grades 2 through 5. Are we going to be able to bring that down to first grade, possibly kindergarten?
So the strategies and materials can be used and end up getting infused throughout, but the actual intervention as it's written is only designed for second grade and up. So we do recognize that we have work to do around kindergarten and first grade. Many of our students get identified later on and are getting targeted intervention in kindergarten and first grade and aren't yet in special education for that support. So we also hope our Orton-Gillingham work will continue to be infused at kindergarten and first grade, but it is an area we have continued to work on. I will also add, because I forgot to say it here, our goal is to train every resource teacher. We don't want this to be, if you go to this school or you have this teacher, you can get this intervention. So that's where the cost comes in, is really making sure every teacher has this training, which will again infuse to our kindergarten, first grade students, even if they're not fully getting this as the intervention.
Okay, and then my second question is, I know that we hadn't identified a resource that was in the Spanish language. Where are we now with kids who are young and haven't mastered English language yet?
So we've been doing our research on this area, and I've been working with Kristen Nelson-Steinhoff in our on our ELD team. And we haven't come up with a solution yet. There's a few reasons for that. The students who are Spanish speaking certainly can have dyslexia, but in the Spanish language it presents very differently because of the orthography of that language. So this is all learning for me. I've been reading the research, I've been working with Kristen and working with Angel, but what we find is kids who are emerging bilinguals, this is not an appropriate intervention. But this type of intervention may not be the right type of intervention based on the orthography of their language. And so we've been researching what is out there, and there's not much out there yet. So we have yet to bring forward a recommendation, but we're sort of continuing in that process of researching and trying to find, if there's something out there, can we get access to it? And if not, then is that something that we need to design in our district to meet those unique needs?
Thanks, Tina. Other questions, comments? Tom?
Thanks for the presentation. I realize this takes time to roll out and to train and to implement. When do you see that rolling into the high school?
So we've already completed the training at the high school, and our expectation is that they'll start providing the intervention in January at the start of the second semester.
Great. Excellent, excellent. Now, so we're only talking here about the special education students, and as I recall, significant learning disability is classified as 12th percentile and below. Is that right?
That's one of the factors that's considered in determining eligibility.
So,
yes.
So I know this question is more addressed at Cindy and the rest of the staff, but we have students that are reading at the 40 percentile level and the 50 percentile level. Our IRA scores said, nearly a third of our third graders can't read at proficient at grade level. Nearly half of our fifth graders can't proficient. When are we, and I know you guys, going to be able to roll out and address that with some of the structured literacy and things that they're talking about? Cindy, have we talked about that? I mean, I'm catching you cold here, but it just comes to mind.
We are currently in the process of looking at what our budget needs are. And as you talk about your budget needs, you also talk about your instructional needs. So I would like to ask for a little more time to think about that. I think that we do have interventions for kids throughout the years. And this one is not necessarily for all students.
Sure.
So you really have to be very thoughtful about what a student's needs are before you implement this, and they've done a great job. But you really have to match strategy to the needs of the student. So that will be continued conversation as we, as cabinet, prioritize our budget requests.
I could add a little bit to that. A couple of things are going on. Again, we work very closely with instructional services. We're not doing anything without partnering with them because it wouldn't make sense in our system to do otherwise. So I am sort of co-chairing a dyslexia advisory team with Angel from Literacy, and we have met monthly up until this point, and we'll meet a few more times this year. So we've been working on some of those bigger concepts and where they fit in, and so maybe three large things that are in the works. One, there's a materials adoption that is current. I think it started yesterday, Sam? Today? Looking at elementary materials being adopted and bringing in some of those structured literacy programs, having some of our parents and our community members on that committee to look at where does that fit in with our universal and targeted instruction. There's also been quite a bit of work done on bringing in Orton Gillingham into our district with some of our point schools and with our literacy interventionists across the district. There's been 3 cohorts of training. So that also brings in structured literacy at a targeted intervention level and in some ways in universal instruction in some schools. And then the third thing is we're working with a group of our dyslexia advisory committee members to look at assessment, because there's also this identification question and where should assessment occur, especially at kindergarten. So a lot of work and conversation is happening without the answers yet to where it's all going to lead.
Yeah, well, I look forward to, I guess, watching you guys on TV as to where you're going with this. And certainly the screening was something that we discussed during the budget times and trying to get it into our general education population so we can get that early identification. So I'm anxious, and maybe we can, as a board, you guys can look at some of the surplus funding. Maybe we can get some of that screening going. Would be fantastic. Thanks again for all your hard work.
Thanks, Tom. Other questions? Richard?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was really great. I just Googled for Spanish speakers, and something came up that's called Pedagogía Terapéutica y Adición y Lenguaje. You may want to do that. It's PTYAL. And I just went through some of the activities, and they sure look a lot like the Wilson activities. So,
I'd be happy to do that. Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Other board members, questions? Shelley?
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. It's nice to have an update so quickly after the last one so we can keep this in front of us. Just a couple of quick questions. So the cost that you're listing here, the $130,000 and then later the $170,000, those are sort of the fixed costs of getting into this business of doing this, right? And the $30,000 is the ongoing cost and whatever that was for 2018-19. So if I just do a quick calculation, you know, over the 107 students that you're working with right now, if you just look at the ongoing costs, that's about $280 a student, which is nothing to teach a student how to read and have them feel successful. So I think once we get this set up and all the fixed costs and, set aside, and now we're just looking at the ongoing costs, that this is a tremendous investment for the district, I think. And so I have a quick question about measuring results. It looks like you're looking at PARC as your primary measure. Is that right? No?
Go ahead.
Okay. No, PARC, we would anticipate that we're putting all of this time and effort into an intervention, that we would see some difference on our PARC results for our students with a specific learning disability. So that wouldn't be our primary measure, but it's something that we're going to keep tracking data around to see what the result is.
Okay.
I think our primary measure is looking at individual students and their iReady scores, their BAS scores, and their WIST test scores to see over a year or 2 years or 3 years how much progress are we seeing in what areas, and make some analysis from that.
Okay. And Michelle, just to brag on Michelle a little bit, she set up data tracking systems for each school where they are, as a student enters into the system or the intervention, they'll then have data points that are going to be tracked throughout their experience in Wilson to make sure that it's the right intervention, because we don't want to waste instructional
Right.
time. If it's not working for them, then we need to look at what we're going to do differently. So she, as schools and kids get involved, she set up data tracking systems for each of the schools
That's
to
great.
use to really be pinpoint in their data around whether or not this is working effectively or not for each
That's
student.
great. That's perfect. I was just a little concerned if we were just waiting for Park to tell us what was going to.
No, but
So,
absolutely,
yeah,
we'll be
that-
progress monitoring throughout.
Okay, so then at some point, would you be willing to come back and tell us when you're comfortable that whether you think this is making a significant difference or not? And
Absolutely. We will have for our elementary students our benchmarking assessment through iReady, because all of our students are having that assessment already. So I think that'll be the measure we'll have some information on by the end of this year. Again, high schools, that's going to be a little harder because I think we're going to look at some longer term measures just because they don't have some of those embedded benchmarking assessments. But we could certainly report back progress at any time and let you know where we are.
Great, thanks a lot. I think when it's time for us to talk about the budget next time, just make sure that your request is in there, because I think this is really money well spent. Thanks.
Thanks, Shelley. Are there any other questions or comments, board members? Jenny?
Just really quickly, so once we get this rolled out at elementary, how many students do we anticipate at the elementary? I mean, how many students total do you think? Maxed out, or do we think we'll see more than that?
No, it's hard to give an estimate because even when we train all teachers, not all teachers are going to use it at the same time for all students. You know, some of our elementary resource teachers are serving, you know, K1 and 2, so they may, you know, the number of students we serve in this first year is not necessarily comparable to the second or third year, but absolutely more than 107. So that's where we are today, and we continue to add students every 2 weeks. We're getting new students to the list, so that's exciting to see. I'm not sure where that will plateau at some point as we get all of our teachers trained, but it'll certainly be more than where we are now.
Yeah, yeah, and so we're not. This is not, or is it replacing LLI and reading recovery, or do we continue to use those?
No, this
interventions
addresses,
as well?
so LLI is really around fluency and comprehension. This really looks at phonics, phonemic awareness, and decoding, so it's targeting different different areas of 5 components of literacy for kids.
And I heard last year, this is just sort of a general question. I heard last year, you know, a number of parents would come in and say, well, and I talked to people who said, my child got up to grade level, and so we stopped getting interventions for them, so then they fell behind. Will this program address that issue, or is that going to continue to be an ongoing issue for some students?
So that's a great question. So I think that's part of the conversation as we work with our peers in general education around if kids are successful in Wilson and get up to grade level and are no longer then really eligible for special education services anymore, what supports are in place through MTSS, through general education that a kid can maintain now where he or she is at. And so that's why it's so important that we partner with those folks, that it's a seamless system where kids can receive support in both general education and or special education.
Thank you.
Well, if there's no further questions, thank you for this encouraging update, and thanks to you and your team for all your work. We appreciate it. Look forward to hearing more at a later date.
Thank you.
Board members, I need to take a 5-minute break. Calling the meeting back to order. Next item on our agenda is the action items consent grouping, including 8.1 personnel items, 8.2 approval of minutes, October 24th special/regular meeting, 8.3 approval of minutes, November 7th, 2017 special meeting, 8.4 acceptance of donation Boulder High School, 8.5 acceptance of donation Casey Middle School, 8.6 acceptance of donation Douglas Elementary, 8.7 acceptance of donation Fairview High School, 8.8 acceptance of donation Lafayette Elementary, 8.9 acceptance of donation Louisville Elementary, 8.10, acceptance of donation New Vista High School. 8.11, closeout to the construction manager/general contractor contract for bond-funded work at the Douglas Elementary School. 8.12, contract for real estate services. And 8.13, data warehouse and data visualization support change order. Are there any items board members would like to pull from the consent grouping? Hearing none, before we begin. Okay, Shelley? Okay, 8.12 is pulled. Are there any other items board members would like to pull? Hearing none, before we begin discussion, we need a motion to approve the remaining items on the consent agenda. Motion from Kathy, second from Tina. Is there discussion of any item on the consent grouping? Hearing none, Laura, will you please call the vote on the consent grouping?
Belval. Yes. Benford. Yes. Fuqua.
Yes.
Garcia. Yes. Gephardt. Yes. Marquis. Yep. Myers.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, 8.12 was pulled, contract for real estate services. Shelley?
Yeah, I was not aware that this was a dedication situation. So I would appreciate more of an opportunity to learn about what the district is proposing to do there, and so I would move to table this until we've had further discussion about this issue as a board.
Does table require a motion, Melissa? Okay. Motion is to table. Second? Does it require a second? Postpone, yes. Motion to postpone. Okay.
Second.
Second from Tom. Further discussion? Dr. Stevenson?
I was just going to say that we can address it tonight, but if you're going to table it, we'll address it in the future.
Yeah, we can have discussion right now.
We can do an explanation if you think that would be helpful. Ms.
Yeah.
Stafford?
Sure.
Well, I think that I don't know. They're talking about the dedication issue.
Right, we don't have information on the dedication issue. If that's the piece that you want, we have information on the land itself and the discussion and the resolution to sell the land.
Yeah, I'd like information on how it was originally dedicated to us, and yeah.
That we'll have to get.
Yep. So we will wait.
We can wait, yes.
All right, thank you.
We can wait. Any other comments, board members? All right. Hearing none, Laura, you want to call the vote on the motion to table item 8.12? Postpone it?
The motion is to postpone the contract for real estate services. Belval.
I have no idea, sure.
Benford. Yes. Fuqua.
Yes.
Garcia. Yes. Gephardt. Marquis. Yes. Myers.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, and thank you, Dr. Stevenson and staff, for providing further background on that before it comes back to us. Moving now to the action items on our agenda. First is 9.1, the 2018 BVSD legislative platform. I believe to begin discussion, need a motion to approve the platform. Motion from Tina, a second. Second from Shelley. Is there discussion of the 2018 legislative platform? We've had this on study and work session a couple times. Hearing no discussion, we will call the vote then, Laura, on the motion to approve the 2018 legislative platform.
Belval.
Yes.
Benford. Yes. Fuqua.
Yes.
Garcia.
Yes.
Gephardt. Yes. Marquis. Yes. Myers.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, next action item is 9.2, School District Attorney Policy. To begin discussion, I need a motion to approve. Motion from Tina, second. Anybody second it? From Kathy. Is there discussion of the latest draft of the school district attorney policy? Tom?
Yes. I think it, the draft we got's a lot closer, but not quite what I was looking for. And so I think that some of it is changing the order of things so it makes it a little more clearly stated. It's a little bit confusing about the board attorney part, where it's placed, and I think that would be better placed at the end, because the initial part talks about the superintendent and coordinating activities of general counsel and so on and so forth, which doesn't apply to that first part where it would be a board attorney. And I also would like to strengthen that up a bit. So what I would like to do is to offer an amendment to that document. I sent that to Laura. I don't know if you, Laura, if you got that, what my amendment was that you could pass around to the board members. Yeah, this afternoon, yeah. So anyway, what I propose is an amendment to basically start back from the original document we worked from. At the point of the third paragraph in this latest.
What original document? Is this the original, the red line that's in the packet, or are you referring to a separate document?
We started with one the time before, and then.
Referring to a different document now that I don't have in front of me?
It is essentially redlined. What we got as a red line version is a red line of that original document.
So we're looking at the, so in the red line document, that is the original plus the red line proposed additions.
The proposed
is that correct?
Changes.
Is
Yeah.
there a way to email us the change, Laura? Because I think we all have email.
Yeah, so you could, that would be great.
I'm not going to be able to follow along.
Of course, that's why I sent it to Laura so you guys could see it. Yeah. Anyway, I'll go ahead. So what I would like this amendment.
I'm sorry. I just sent it.
I don't have it.
Coming soon.
Slow email.
I'm not ready to discuss.
Do you want me to make copies?
Okay.
Okay, everyone got it?
I'm not sure.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, good. While you're looking at that, what that is my is what I would like to offer as an amendment, and I can describe it once you guys pull it up.
Sam,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what the procedure is for this, but is there any way to give us time to look at this other than trying to read it now on the fly?
Well, we can postpone action on this. There's no immediate need that I'm aware of to approve this policy tonight. Is that, unless I'm missing something, is that?
I would prefer to table it.
Yeah.
We're looking into that.
Just for simplicity, it is the same wording that I presented last time.
Yeah, I didn't,
Just this last red paragraph, is that what we're talking about?
That, yes.
We need to read
But-
it in connection
but
with everything else.
I know,
So what I did is take the proposed wording I had last time about board independent legal counsel, which is what that was about. Melissa tried to get some of the essence of our discussions last time around and put it as a third paragraph. And to me, that was confusing. So what I did is basically removed what is now the third paragraph of the red line version that was in the board agenda. changed the wording on the next paragraph that starts with number 1, coordinating activities of, and instead of attorneys, I put general counsel, internal and external, so that it was clear that the superintendent coordinates that portion of the policy. The rest of the policy was unchanged, and then I added the last paragraph, which is, besides some connecting words, the same verbiage that I used last time that I had pulled from 3 different policies of local school districts, primarily one coming from Colorado Springs District 11. And I added some of Melissa's wording that says in addition to the superintendent selection recommendation of general counsel above, the board reserves the right to obtain independent legal counsel should occasion arise regarding such legal services. That was in Melissa's red lines. And as such, then I added the wording that I had previously.
So,
that you
so
guys have
is your
seen.
wording, are you interpreting it that we would do it in the case that we wish to get legal counsel as we did in the spring, and we didn't need any policy to do that? Or is this something where you always want to have someone
Yeah,
else?
this is what I offered before, where I always wanted somebody.
It doesn't read like that. So it's,
Well,
and I'm opposed to it anyway.
Let me read it then, so
So,
everybody can
no,
get.
I'd already read it.
Okay,
All right? I mean, I don't need to have it read to me.
okay. I think
So-
it does, and so I
Okay.
disagree with you.
Right, the amendment, sorry, Tom's offered an amendment, but it has not been formally moved.
Okay, so I move to adopt my submitted version as an amendment to what was put forward.
Is there a second? Second from Shelley. Okay, let's continue the discussion. So, Tom, let me ask you, you've changed the duration for the time period from 6 months, which is in Melissa's draft, to 2 years. Why is that?
Well, 2 years was in my original draft, and that was what was in the policies that I reviewed from other districts. And I felt that 6 months is too short of a time to be changing, and reviewing full attorneys. I mean, that's less than a school year. And I thought it was reasonable every 2 years, because we bring on, a new election every 2 years when we rotate through board members, and that would be a good time to do it, to review it.
And Melissa, the 6 months, was that your? I interpreted that as being able to check how we're doing on use of that attorney and the fees that may or may not be adding up. So I kind of liked that shorter duration for that reason. Tina?
Can I ask a clarifying question? So Melissa, in your draft, is it that we would get counsel for 6 months when we need it? Or that we would be hiring counsel, because, I mean, philosophically, that'd be a huge difference.
So that's, I would say, a significant language difference is in the version that I proposed for the board based on hearing all of your comments last time. I put may
Right.
use that kind of counsel, and I think Tom's language is shall.
Okay, yeah, so I mean.
That would imply
right.
that somebody's hired for automatically as opposed to as needed.
Right. I personally felt like the spring worked for us, that we needed legal counsel. We were able to hire legal counsel. We can always do that, and I don't see why we need to have someone in retainer. And I'm a little concerned because when Thompson School District did this, they racked up $136,000 of legal fees in 18 months. And I don't want to put in policy that we shall do this all the time, because I think that's foolish. I think if we want to do this, we can experiment with it, because our policy already allows us that latitude. We're going to have to do it as a majority of the board. And so I don't see any reason why we would hire someone permanently as a third legal arm to the board, except when we need it. And I haven't seen as many instances, I know, in the last 4 years. So, and when we had the instance, we acted appropriately. That's my sense on it. So I'm very worried about how much money we're going to spend. We spent a ton of legal fees in the spring, and I think we need to have a lot of caution about that.
Okay, thanks, Tina. Other questions, comments? Shelley?
So the intent of this is for us to have a go-to law firm if we need one, right? Not that we appoint this firm and start racking up legal fees, right? We would only go to them like we did in the spring when we absolutely needed them. And so the fees we incurred in the spring, we absolutely needed to incur. There's no question about that, right? Yeah, but that's not how this reads. I'm addressing Tina's comment from a minute ago.
It does, although I think that because we don't have a lot of stipulation about how this will be used, that I'm concerned about how different people might interpret it. And I would need to add other language that talks about how information and consultations with legal advice are shared with the board. I think we already have too many one-to-one conversations going on this. But I don't see any reason why we have to have someone on retainer because we don't generally need someone on retainer. So I know that we had one instance in the spring, but I thought that the other thing is we were able to retain the right lawyer. So we have different types of situations coming on, and there's no one legal resource that can meet the various needs that we're going to encounter over 2 years. So for me, I think that we don't need to do that, that we should always have the window open as we exercise in the spring to hire whomever we want, and the board will do that, and they'll look at the situation and say, okay, this is the kind of lawyer we want, this is the firm we want, and we'll be able to do that. But I mean, and I appreciate the intent of being able to have more legal advice. I think legal advice is good, and we should always, always follow legal advice. But I don't think we need to have a permanent other party. Or if we are going to do this, I think we need to think about how we're structuring our entire legal strategy.
Okay, thanks, Tina. Other comments, board members?
Can I just address that?
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, as you know, it wasn't that easy to get to the decision to consult an outside attorney as, I don't know, as I would have liked. So I think that that's the advantage of doing something like that, that there is someone, some firm in place when a situation arises. Now, I think you make a good point about it depends on the situation which firm you might want, right? That's a point that you made. So I guess I would think that if we did appoint a firm to be our go-to firm in case something ever happened again, it would have to be probably a pretty general firm where there were lots of practices, which indeed we did end up with. So I would be fine, and I don't understand, Tom, is the thinking that we retain them for a fee at the beginning, or we just pick a firm and we go to them when we need them?
That was a misunderstanding way back, and so the intent is not that we put them on retainer, but that we pre-negotiate by, we said, mutual, terms and conditions and fees, such that they are available when needed. And there's some safeguards about has to be coordinated with the president and things like that. So it can't be just, willy-nilly anybody calling them up and generating expenses. But when we have a situation, then we can, react rapidly, and we already have agreed upon resource that we have approved and designated for that purpose, so that we actually can then, like in the spring, rapidly then move forward. That was the intent.
So if I could, Sam,
Yep.
respond to that. So that's your main purpose in presenting this, is so that it's not a long drawn out process when we need this service, that it's right there and ready to go. That's the primary reason for this.
So that board members have a resource, and it has to be coordinated, some rules about coordinating with the president, such that then, another legal opinion can be obtained rapidly.
Right.
Or if there's issues with individual board members that they don't know what to do and have some concerns about conflicts within the organization, then there is a resource outside the organization that board member could go to Sam and say, or the president, you're not going to be president for long, or maybe you will be, I don't know. Anyway, and say, I have this issue, Sam, and I really need to get some outside legal advice because this is something that is very confidential and very explosive, and I think we need to be careful with it. Something that I encountered on my tenure as a board that I wish I'd had this resource I could have gone to, and we didn't have it.
Yeah, so for me, that's more the relevant point. I think that it would be nice if we think there is a potential conflict that we have someone else to go to. And I don't know how you do that in the moment, if it requires setting up executive sessions, having special conversations about that multiple times. Like, it feels to me that there is some benefit in having something arranged for a board member who's in that position to go to.
I appreciate the point. I feel like we could do it under the language Melissa has presented, but Kathy?
I'm troubled by the procedure we're going through here, which is being presented with this at the last minute with more changes than we have an ability to digest. I agree that under Melissa's proposed policy, we can accomplish everything we need to accomplish. And I see no need to go into this, and I think asking us to look at this from the fly on the board table when we don't have a chance to look at it is not the way we should be making this policy. We've had the board agenda out for a while, and we just got this emailed to us, and I think that I agree with you, Sam, that I think file BDG allows us to do what we need to do. We can always contact an attorney if we find ourselves in that situation. And I guarantee you there will always be an attorney, it may take a call or two, who would be able to help us. We're not lacking for attorneys in this state.
Yeah, Shelley, and then I want to hear from board members who haven't.
I would say that, Kathy, it may look like this is on the fly, but I do believe that Tom put this in writing a long time ago. And so probably what should have come to us was the existing policy with Tom's comments in it, and then redlined by the district saying this is what they would prefer. So all of that could have been together in this document. It's not like this is just coming tonight for the first time.
But that's not my memory of the procedure, but that's all right, Shelley.
And Richard or Jenny, do you have anything to add?
I think, yeah, I'm a little puzzled by all of this. I don't see the point of having a third attorney on hire all of the time. I feel like the procedure, nothing was going to work very well last spring. It was going to make things very smooth last spring, but I think that the part about getting counsel went as well as it could have gone. And again, predicting who we're going to want in a particular situation, I just find this whole, the school board is an entity that's going to need separate representation from the district on a regular basis to be disturbing. That shouldn't, there's something wrong if that needs to be addressed out in a different way, if that is in fact the case. I'm really also not really prepared to discuss this amendment because I've just seen it now for the first time. I had prepared my thoughts about the red line version that was in our packet. I don't know whose fault that is, but I'm really not prepared to discuss the amendment tonight. So I think if the amendment is what the board wants to talk about, it should be postponed to another meeting.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm not interpreting either policy as saying the board is going to need this on a regular basis, either Tom's amendment or the red line. I think it's just, I think Tom's is more prescriptive about putting it in place, but I think, Tom, we could do it what you're suggesting with the language that's been presented in the red line version. Any other any response or? Yeah.
So first of all, I object to people who haven't seen this. They have. I handed out at the last board meeting this exact wording. I just then tried to incorporate what Melissa had done to put it in a place I felt made sense, which was at the end and not in the middle. That was confusing. So this language is exactly the same language I handed out at the board meeting we had before when we discussed this on study, and that's why we do a study, so we can get this stuff out there and see it. So I object. You have all seen this. It's not the first time. Now, put into a form like this, yeah, because with our process, the way it works, there was no way for me to get it out there and get it on the board agenda. It was just all came from staff. So the process is the issue, but this, you've seen it before. And I think there is big differences, Sam. I do disagree with that. There's a big difference between a may and a shall. You know, a shall is an assurance that a board member will have the support they need should they encounter a situation like I encountered and had no one to go to. And I felt there was a conflict of interest in between. And I needed that support. I'm not talking about a retainer spending a lot of money, but it is a response to a situation we incurred and may incur again, and hopefully by putting in more checks and balances and the way that we deal with these things, we won't have to go through the similar things that we went before. So that's my rationale.
Hey,
Yes, Jenny?
Like what we're talking about is giving the board the opportunity to opinion shop, so that if we don't like the opinion that one of our councils gives us, we can then consult another attorney for another opinion that we might like better. And I'm not sure that I think that's a great idea either. And I also feel like if the outside counsel we normally contract with to provide opinions is giving us what we feel is bad advice, we ought to just change that rather than adding a third layer.
Okay, any other comments at this point? Otherwise, I think we can vote on Tom's amendment. Right, that would be the next step, Melissa? Yeah. Well, I think we have to call the vote for, yeah.
So what are we voting on?
Voting on the amendment that Tom has offered.
The motion on the table is to amend the school district attorney policy to what Tom has presented just now via email. Belval.
No.
Wait, just now via email?
Well, the one that I just sent out via email is what we're voting to amend.
Tom's amendment is contained in the email Laura distributed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Belval.
No.
Benford.
Yes.
Fuqua.
No.
Garcia.
Yes.
Gebhardt.
No.
Marquis.
No.
Myers.
Yes.
Motion fails.
Well, I think we did move the red line version, is that correct? Yeah.
So, yes. So now,
Now that question, either discussion.
Yeah, so is there further discussion of the original, the red line version that was the subject of the first motion? If not, we can.
I have one quick
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, Richard?
I got a comment, and I'm trying to remember what Tina said in terms of if we're going to vote on Tom's motion, then I think we ought to look at relooking at the whole legal structure or something to that extent. I don't know if that's.
It kind of ties in with Jenny said. It seems like we're having some frustration around the legal. I'm not personally, I'm okay, but I recognize that we have people have different thoughts about how we are getting legal advice. And so I don't know, I don't think Tom's amendment is the solution, and hiring lots and lots of lawyers is. So maybe it's time to look at that.
Yeah, and I agree with that. So I would support this motion with that caveat, if we kind of leave it open so that we can start looking at the different strategies that we have in terms of legal counsel and all of
We
them.
can review that, but I'd like staff to lead it though.
Yeah.
But that's not a motion, that's just a.
Yeah, well,
No, but that's a good comment. I think I like that.
And I want to make, well, go ahead, Tom.
yeah, it seems like if that's what you want to do, maybe the postpone is a better answer, so we can look at it as a whole and then bring it back once we've had some time. You know, I'm not going to make your motion for you, but I'm just realizing that.
Well, I feel like we could approve this and then in the very near future have the discussion about whether we want to appoint an independent legal counsel and try that for 6 months. You know, but that's kind of, that option is available to us under this language. So.
Question, Stan?
Yes, unless, yeah, sure.
So I guess as I'm reading this, I don't really understand why there's 6 months in there at all. I mean, couldn't you just avoid that line and
Oh, well, let me get Melissa's thing. I know she was trying to synthesize the many views that were presented the last time we discussed this, but did you have a particular reason for 6 months?
Well, we had talked, there had been a time period in there. Superintendent and I talked about what that time period should be. I mean, I think that's a reasonable amount of time, that usually if there's some extra issue that the board's dealing with, it could be wrapped up in that time period. Obviously, it could be extended if there was something unusual, but it just seemed like to deal with a particular legal event that would be sufficient.
Okay.
It just seems like the line before takes care of it because it's mutually agreed between the board and lawyer. So whether it's 6 months, 3 months, or 12 months, it's all agreed upon. So it just seems sort of pointless to have a time period in there.
Any other comments about that piece? Jenny?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure we need the 6 month. I think that whatever the situation is, I kind of agree with Shelley on that. I think that what we were I think maybe what we were talking about was a separate issue, which may be for the ongoing outside legal counsel we might want. I mean, sometimes we have other businesses with which we revisit, put out an RFI and revisit. And that may be where the conversation came from about how long the appointment for just our general outside counsel was, but I'm not even sure about that. And I don't have real strong feelings about the 6 months. It just seems like we didn't need one. Last time we did this, didn't take 6 months.
Well, yes, Kathy.
I don't have any angst over the 6 months because we can keep it going. We can, with a subject to board approval. So I think it's almost a red herring in there, and I don't have a problem with keeping it. I just as soon move this issue along and see how it goes. And I think there's a motion pending that we should vote on soon.
Okay.
Any other comments? Yes, Tom.
Yeah, so part of the reason for my amendment is I felt like it was very confusing here where it's put in because it talks about basically the board of reserves right for independent counsel, and then the next statement says upon appointment by the board, the superintendent shall designate and do all these things, and that would not be the case if the board had appointed a independent legal counsel. So it is very confusing as a policy in here to say that the board will do something in the superintendent, because that's not the purpose of this clause at all. That's why I put it at the end and called it independent counsel.
I see.
So, so I would object that it's just, regardless of the wording that the board would like, it is not clear here. In fact, it's very muddy, and that needs to be fixed.
So one possible way to respond to that concern would be to move the red line paragraph to the bottom of that section prior to the professional standards heading.
Or even after it is what I did, because it seemed to be a lot of that still referred to the general counsel, internal, external, and not to the board independent counsel.
You would pull that out as a separate.
I would put it at the very end of the document with a separate heading like I did in the proposal, so that it's clear that it is different than the others.
Board members, any comments on this particular piece of it? I kind of see your point, Tom. And Melissa, is there any particular reason why you inserted it there, or could it live somewhere else in the policy, that language?
The language that was in black type was already right there at the bottom of the second paragraph.
I see. Does anybody else feel that its location in this part of the document is confusing? Okay.
If you want to put it at the end, that's fine. You can put it at the middle. I didn't have an issue with that.
Okay. Any objection to moving it then? Okay. Any objection, I mean, that cause any problems relocating that paragraph that you see? Okay. So I would make a motion that we move the red line paragraph that begins in addition to the superintendent's selection to the end of this document. Any second from Tina? Any discussion there?
So if we vote to move it, we're not voting on the policy.
That's correct. This is just to relocate that paragraph to the bottom of the policy after the sentence that begins, "The board president may consult all counsel as necessary."
Sam, can I clarify your amendment there? Would you then also put the heading there so that it identifies that it is different?
Well, I think it's under the heading access to counsel, which seems to be what we're talking about.
Yeah, the last, okay.
So it is under a new heading from its
Okay.
previous location.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the motion before us. There is a second. If there's no further discussion, Laura, could you call the vote on the motion to relocate the red line paragraph that begins with addition to the superintendent's selection to the very bottom of the document? Are you clear on the motion, Laura?
I am.
Okay.
Thank you. Belval?
Yes.
Benford? Fuqua?
Yes.
Garcia?
Yes.
Gebhardt? Marquis?
Yes.
Myers?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, then I think we're back to the motion to approve this policy as presented with the change we just made to move that one paragraph. Is that correct? Is there further discussion of that motion? We talked about it. There was seemed to be there was no particular motion offered about that. I think there was discussion of whether to leave that in, to remove it, so it's just talks about an appointment on a fee-for-service basis that's more open-ended, but a point was also made that even if, we say 6 months, we can extend it or not, so it seemed like 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Is that a good summary of the discussion of that piece?
Yeah, I mean, I would almost make it shorter, because 6 months is a long time. I mean, but that doesn't, so if we say 6 months, that doesn't mean we have to write a contract for 6 months, do we? We can write one for 3 months.
Engagement letters
Yeah.
have a time frame for a matter.
Hang on. Say that again, Melissa, please.
Most engagement letters with a law firm are going to be for a particular matter, for a length of time.
Okay.
Well, I move that we take that sentence out, because I think the sentence before it covers it.
The appointment, take out the sentence that says the appointment shall be for,
Right, 6 months.
so then we just go from mutually agreed to the president of the board will coordinate communications.
That's a motion. Is
Wait,
there-
so is the period of time agreed to by the president of the board or by the majority of the board?
No, the board may appoint, so that it's mutually agreed with the board, and then the president of the board will coordinate communications. So it's still, it's always been, and it still will be, that the board will make the appointment.
Yeah. The motion is, as I understood it, to remove the sentence that says the appointment shall be for 6 months on a fee-for-service basis with reappointment subject to board approval.
Okay, so it's, well, and
So
but
that
who,
mo-
is it, can we
Actually, I
also?
think that motion requires a second before we discuss it. Is that right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Basis, because you had the discussion about retainers.
Yeah.
And that you weren't interested in doing that. So fee for
Yeah.
service implies you're paying as you go. Service
I
you
appreciate that
use.
point, and I do think calling out fee-for-service basis is important. Shelley, do you want to modify your motion?
No, because I think the sentence above it which says, upon such terms as may be mutually agreed covers that as well. We would make it a fee for service. Right?
I would like to call out the fee for service. I probably won't support a motion that takes out the fee for service. Because I
Well-
think that's a good idea that we're not doing a retainer. I think that's important to me.
But the board can always say that when it's time to enlist this firm, because it says there that the board makes the terms.
Right, I think that if we're gonna put this, I don't really need any of this in policy at all. I think we
I
can
don't
just.
think it is policy language to put all this
I don't
detail
think
in
it is policy. I don't think any of this is policy. I think we could have done all this without this. But if we're gonna do it, though, I'd rather it be so that we don't end up with people working for us on retainers. So I guess if we're going to get this detailed, if we want to go this deep into the weeds, I'd rather it called out with fee for service.
Okay. Shelley, I don't know if you want to modify your motion or at least restate it.
I think if someone else wants to modify my motion, they can. I'm not interested in modifying it because I think that the sentence Melissa put in there covers the timing and the terms already. The board decides what they are. The board at that time can say this is a fee for service.
Yeah.
And do it then. I think that that's really getting into the weeds as far as an overall policy is concerned.
So does Shelley's motion have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. The motion is to remove the sentence that reads, the appointment shall be for 6 months on a fee-for-service basis with reappointment subject to board approval. Further discussion? Okay. Could you call the vote on that motion, Laura?
Belval,
No.
Benford,
Yes.
Fuqua,
No.
Garcia,
Yes.
Gebhardt,
No.
Marquis,
No.
Myers.
Yes.
Motion fails.
So let me offer an alternative motion that we strike that same sentence but change it to the appointment shall be on a fee-for-service basis, period. So we've removed the time duration, but we've left in the language about fee-for-service. So I'm making a motion that that sentence now is removed and replaced with the appointment shall be on a fee-for-service basis, period. Anybody want to second that? Richard seconds that. Is there discussion of this? Okay, could you call the vote on the motion to replace the sentence that begins with the appointment shall be for 6 months with a sentence that says the appointment shall be on a fee-for-service basis, period. And
Belval,
is that clear, Laura?
Mhm.
Okay.
Belval,
Yes.
Benford,
Yes.
Fuqua,
Yes.
Garcia,
Yes.
Gebhardt, Marquis,
Yes.
Myers.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so now the original, we've modified the draft somewhat, but the original motion to approve it remains on the table. Is that correct, Melissa?
Right.
Yes, I'm learning Robert's rules just in time to leave this chair. Okay, is there further discussion?
One more thing, Sam.
Yes, Tom.
You know, I could certainly live with this. The language I would have liked to be a little stronger. However, the one point that I'm really in following my sword about is changing the may to a shall. I really think we need this. I don't think it, otherwise it's no different. I really think that we need to have this available to a board member with the proper controls. Not something, because if it's a may, then we're in the same situation. I need help, where do I go? Well, okay, let's convene, let's talk about it, let's have a motion, let's meet in exec session. It's not available. And I want to have this available ahead of time so it is an avenue for a board member that needs help with the appropriate controls. So I don't think the may fits, my intent at all. I can live with the language as it is if we could just change the may to a shall.
Tina?
I think that just comes, we just went full circle. So I appreciate your point, but I feel that, again, we're getting into what Jenny called opinion shopping. So I think that we can, again, to what Richard brought up, look at how our legal services are being provided, get an idea of what that is, and in the meantime, I don't think we need to hire a third lawyer.
Okay, further discussion on the motion?
Yeah, I would just ask Tina, what would you recommend if a board member felt that there was some sort of conflict of interest between the attorney and the board on a given issue? What would you recommend be done in that situation?
I think they should go to the board first, and then we can decide to get another lawyer. And that's what we do. It's exactly what we did in the spring.
And that was at least 2 years after it was needed.
Okay, so I'm not going to go there.
No.
And I'd like to call this to a vote.
I would like to make one final comment, Shelley. I think another option as I read this policy is the board could discuss appointing a council tomorrow based on this policy if we feel like we need to put one in place. Even, even without a specific issue pending, you know, we have that option, so. I think you are allowed to call the question. Is that correct, Melissa?
Ask you to call the question.
Yeah, unless there's more to discuss.
Yeah, I have a question about your comment just now.
Sure.
So, so if we were to do that without an issue, I mean, what would we be doing in that case? Like, we would just be putting someone on hold in case an issue came up? Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
And the board could do that at any point?
As I read the policy, is that correct, Melissa?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, going through a process to identify a firm.
Right.
Can I make one comment, Sam?
Of course.
I can't let what, the process you described that you don't want to have to go through Tom and Shelley, I have to say that's what board work is. You were describing board work, which is sometimes messy and difficult. And I don't see any way to get around that.
Without hearing further discussion, could call the vote on the motion.
Well,
You got more? Is that?
Just clarify. So, Tom, given what Sam just said, what do you make of that?
It's still empty unless we actually do something. I mean, it gets back, if we're going to go and do that at the next board meeting, then we're going to go through the same process. And if we really want to do that, let's just have a shall and let's do it. Why would we do a may and then come back in 2 weeks and then say, okay, let's go do it? Let's just put a shall and let's do it. I mean.
Okay, I'm going to call the question. I think I might have done that, but.
The motion on the table is to approve the district attorney, or the school district attorney, the school district attorney policy as modified. Belval.
Wait, I don't know what we're voting on. So is there a shall in what we're voting on, or a may? Just the may? Okay, we're just voting on what's in front of me in my packet, the red line version.
Well, actually, we had moved that paragraph to the bottom, and we had changed a sentence to read, the appointment shall be on a fee-for-services basis. So we had approved those two changes.
Okay, with those two changes?
Yes.
Yes.
Benford.
No.
Fuqua.
Yes.
Garcia.
Yes.
Gebhardt.
Yes.
Marquis.
Yes.
Myers.
No.
Motion passes.
Appreciate the discussion, board members. Disagree, but without being disagreeable, I appreciate that. Let's move to the study items now. 10.1, the privacy protection.
So Sam, before you move on to the study items,
Yeah.
are we going to come back and look at the way we're looking at legal services? Are we going to do a study on this at
How
some point?
about an RFI?
Okay.
Start with an RFI, and then assuming the new board wants to move forward with prioritizing issues to discuss, I think that would be one to put out there. The study item 10.1 is the Privacy and Protection of Confidential Student Information Policy, JRCB, which is coming back to us for another discussion. And I don't know, Dr. Stevenson or Melissa, do you need to provide some context here for the version that's in front of us?
I think Andrew and Melissa can give us the context.
Oh, yes, and Andrew Moore.
This is...
Good evening.
Yes.
Thanks for sticking around.
So the policy is the CASB model policy that the boards discussed at their last couple work sessions on this topic, with the additional language at the end of the policy relating to what the board at the end of its last work session proposed that we do some, get some feedback from within the district around pros and cons and a couple of issues that Andrew started pulling together that process. So what we took out of the work session was that the board wanted in policy this commitment that we would go forward with that work, knowing that under the state law we're supposed to have the policy in place by the end of the year, and we have this regular meeting and one more regular meeting in December to get that work done in terms of getting the policy in place. So tonight it's on for study, and then a copy of the regulation with the hearing procedures. Again, that's the CASB model for that, and that's also on your board agenda item for reference.
Board members, everybody seeing the addition there in red, calling out the vetting of providers, the feasibility of opting in or opting out, and the use of ChromeSync. Any questions for Andrew or Melissa, unless you have any additional context to provide?
No, we are working to get you that information by early February, and then it'll be available to review with you at your discretion whenever you can get a study session or other venue set up for us to share the information we find.
Okay, appreciate that. Board members, questions, comments? Richard?
I just have a concern, and it's not on the policy, but it's on the regulation. It's more around the hearing of a parent. If the parent has a complaint, I'm talking more around the timing of the amount of time it takes from the time the complaint is lodged and the hearing occurs and stuff. I mean, that's a long spread of time. What happens if there's a complaint that regards the concern of observing and disclosure to a third party? If that complaint is lodged, does that third party continue using the information, or does that stop?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Richard, and I think it's a case-by-case basis. When the law was being written and when the CASB policy was being written, it was under the understanding that if the board is going to have a hearing and something were to happen over the summer, which it could happen, and there are no meetings, say, in the month of July, how do we write a regulation that has a time frame that would allow you guys to meet? Staff would be doing things to mitigate the problem. If it was that severe, I think you'd get a recommendation from us to shut it down. There's this balance between an issue, and I'll use Infinite Campus as an example. If student data was breached in some way and Infinite Campus, the company, was responsible for that, it would still be very hard for us to shut down Infinite Campus immediately. And that's because schools run their schedules on it, attendance data is collected on it, allergy information is in there. And so a breach in that regard is probably not an immediate shutdown.
But would it be for that individual?
So a data breach isn't necessarily about one individual. We can mitigate for a specific individual more than we could if, say, all information was breached within Infinite Campus. So I think that, I don't want to say it depends, but I think there is some human judgment that will have to be applied to any potential data breach that's out there.
Well, and the parent complaint piece would encompass any complaint with regard to compliance with this state law, which, I mean, there are multiple provisions. It's not just around the breach issue. So it's hard to anticipate what that might be. I mean, we would need time to investigate.
I don't think there would be anything that would prevent the board from calling a hearing sooner. As soon as we knew what was going on, we would be communicating that to the board.
We're talking about the second piece, though.
Oh, okay.
Not the first piece with the vendor.
Okay.
But the second piece with if there's a parent complaint that we violated the act.
Got
we
it.
have 30 days to investigate and respond.
Does that answer your question, Richard?
Yes, I know. I guess I'm concerned that vendor is still going to continue doing whatever that vendor is doing without any remedy for that one particular individual concern. Yeah.
Potentially, yes. Yeah. If we shorten that time frame, I think it, it just puts additional constraints on what we can do. And I think every one of these situations will have to be weighed real time on
Some
what the
of our
threat is.
policies use school days. This one uses calendar days to account, to balance that school days when, like next week, we'll be gone all week kind of thing, which.
Would there be issues that would not shut the whole thing down, but that the service provider is violating something and you could issue maybe a temporary shutdown? Would there be issues like
I
that?
would think that we would take, if there's some, immediate concern, we could take action while we're, if we discover something while we're investigating before we respond.
I think this language is also the 30 days for the for a parent to bring something forward is also trying to balance out that there aren't just complaints that may or may not be grounded in any actual event. There's lots of allegations out there of issues, and I know that was discussed at length when the law was actually being written.
Richard, you okay?
Yeah.
Okay, Tina?
Have we had a complaint?
I am not aware of any complaints in the
So we-
state of Colorado at this point.
So we don't have
not-
any.
No.
Because one thing is we could adopt this for now, and then if we're finding that this timeline doesn't work, we can change it since this is new.
A reg. Yeah, that's a
I
great
mean,
point.
because since we don't have any experience with this yet.
Well, and I think as we heard earlier, the proposal is to adopt it for now, meet the December deadline, come back, I think I heard in February, Andrew?
Yeah, it really, we'll have, we should have all of our analysis done by the end of January, and then it's just really up to the board to schedule the time after the end of January to be able to review it.
And then we may or may not want to add language around those three issues we called out, yeah. Tina?
Did the DTAC review the timeline for the complaint procedure?
I don't think we actually, they had the whole policy when we were going through it, but I don't think that actually came up.
That might just be another group to bounce it off, just because I think we have parents on that committee, is that correct?
That is correct.
I mean, I don't want to add too much to your plate, but it
I
might.
can't remember if that was part of the packet or not.
I don't know.
We are meeting with DTAC in December. Most of that meeting will be spent with iFactory and the communications work, but I'm sure I can work in that question.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a balance.
So are you saying you can or you can't get
I
their
can.
feedback? You can.
can,
Great.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Shelley?
This is the JRCBR. Is that different from what we had already? It looks fairly familiar. Is this a brand-new policy, this whole thing?
Right, it's that CASB model.
Well, but
It's
we
been-
did have language about this before in our policy, about what to do with breaches.
Are you talking about the regulation?
I'm talking about the regulation.
Yeah. I mean, that's the CASB model.
And but we had pre-existing policy on this, or regulation on this.
No, because it's new and required by the statute.
But I'm sure there was something in there about if a
We
parent.
have a separate policy that meets the FERPA guidelines around appeal of records, and this tries not to, it keeps that separate, so to the extent there's a parent complaint related to the implementation of the data privacy state law, that it would be funneled through here. But if there's just a complaint about, I
breach.
don't agree with the accuracy of a record that might be kept electronically,
That's a
that goes
separate-
under our regular
Okay, got you.
student record policy with the FERPA appeal, so that's already in policy or reg, I can't remember.
So,
which one.
so Melissa, just to be clear, this is a new policy.
A new
It's a
policy and
result
new
of the
regulation.
statute. Okay, thank you.
So you're not bringing any changes to the student record policy as
Not
part
yet.
of this? Okay, so you.
We've talked about, the plan is get this in place, and we
Okay.
need to update that as well.
Okay.
Further comment, questions? All right, looks like this is coming back on action in December.
December 12th.
Oh, yeah, Shelley, go ahead.
So what exactly would be this new analysis you would be doing that you would have available for us in January?
So this was the analysis that was requested by you as a board at our study session, and it's on those three areas. on creating a pros and cons list to actually establishing a full vetting system for software. So if we had a full vetting system, that would be you couldn't use the software until it was vetted in our district. To opt in or out of data sharing, same thing. And the third one was on Chrome Sync and the pros and cons on either leaving it on or turning it off.
And I, on that last one, was also interested if there are other districts who have shut it off, what districts those are and what their experience has been.
Yes, I'll be able to provide that at that time as well.
Great.
Yeah.
So I believe, Andrew, that the conversation also included contract providers, not just on-demand providers.
Correct, vetting of all of our
Well, the contract providers are vetted because we've got the negotiated contract. It's the on-demand providers that we're not vetting at the district level. They're click-through agreement.
So the contracted software we have, we require them to sign a DPA today, a data privacy addendum, that basically has all the things that they can't do in there.
And we haven't reviewed the data privacy addendum either, which we need to do, because this policy, when it was presented at CASB, there was virtually, I mean, I was there was a whole group of people who had concerns that this policy was not stringent enough. And so now we're bringing this to the board as our preferred policy, when in fact, many districts do not think it's stringent enough. They may be adopting it because they're under time pressure to do so, but it doesn't address all of the concerns that people have about student data privacy. And you know, the business about contract providers, I would not agree that we vet every single contract provider that we have a contract with. We may sign an agreement with them, but I don't think that's the same as vetting them. So I've never seen.
We have a system in place for putting a data protection addendum with contracts that relate to student data.
Right, and the addendum is not adequate, in my opinion. In my opinion, we need to look at the addendum, so I would ask you to bring that back to.
Okay, I think it's been provided. It was at one of the work sessions. It's a 12-page.
I know what it is. I'm saying it's not adequate, and we haven't had a chance to look at that as part of this whole conversation. And in fact, it's attached to one of our contracts on the consent agenda tonight. So we're using it, and we haven't discussed whether it's adequate or not. So
it's been presented at a work session.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, we haven't gotten any feedback either from the board saying that it's not adequate.
It was one of the things that I revised and provided as part of all of the revisions I made.
That was before the Colorado school attorneys across the state put together this data protection addendum. That was finalized, I think, in December last year, and that was after what you would, that packet you.
And so you're saying you revised the addendum after that?
That's the one we're using as the model one that all the school attorneys across the state are trying to work off of.
That was revised when?
It was in December of 2016.
Of 2016.
And I think if the board wants to discuss that again, it's the purview of the board.
Well, okay, thanks, Sam. I just want to add that I have never seen language like this as part of a policy that you're going to investigate this and come back to us as policy language. I'm not sure that that's appropriate to put in policy, irrespective of what it says.
Well, I think this is, I think we would potentially alter the policy based on our review of these three items. Either way, it's going to be removed at some point, right? I mean, that's my expectation, because it says initially we're going to review these three topics, and so I read that as, you know, we're either going to accept this policy as is, or we're going to make adjustments based on the review of those three topics. So I don't see this as staying in the policy forever.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think that was the intent.
Well, we took away from the work session that the board wanted that language in the policy, that there was a firm commitment to look at these three issues.
Yeah, because we were under the deadline. Yeah, so it's a somewhat unusual circumstance with this policy.
Well, I'd just say we've known about this deadline for a very, very long time, and so it's curious to me why it's a scramble now that we have to write this in a policy.
I hear your frustration. I know you're passionate about this issue. I don't think there's been any intent to delay. It's just one of many, many items we have been trying to address. Any further discussion? All right. Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time. And final item is agenda setting. So between now and the end of the year, board members, if I'm tracking this correctly, in 2 weeks we'll be back for a brief a reception for Jenny and Tom, swearing in our new board members, electing officers. That'll be the purpose of that meeting. Work session on December 5th, CASB in between, and then our regular meeting for December will be on the 12th. Okay? Okay, everybody. I think with that, we're adjourned. Thank you, sir. Thank you. You're welcome.